The first thing I heard that Saturday morning was the warning beep of a moving truck backing into my driveway. I was standing barefoot in my kitchen with a mug of coffee when the sound came through the windows, steady and mechanical, followed by the grind of heavy tires over the edge of the pavement. I looked outside expecting to see a delivery driver at the wrong address. Instead, I saw my mother climb out of the passenger side, my younger sister step down behind her, and my sister's 3 children staring up at the house I had bought 6 years earlier. My mother, Susan, didn't wave. She pointed toward the front door like she was directing movers at a property she owned and called, "Kayla's boxes go upstairs. Lydia can start packing whatever she wants to keep." My sister had already opened the back of her SUV, and 12-year-old Mia was holding a box marked MIA, books, new room against her chest. When I walked outside and asked what the hell was happening, Mom looked at me as if I were the one being unreasonable. "She needs this house more than you do," she said. "You don't even have kids. If you're listening to this with me, I hope you're doing well." Because that sentence was only the beginning of what turned into one of the ugliest family fights of my life. Stay with me. Because what I discovered after that moving truck arrived was much bigger than a mother favoring one daughter over another. And if you enjoy stories about family secrets, boundaries, and consequences, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what happened next. This happened a few months ago, on Saturday, April 18th. I was 38, living alone in a 6-bedroom house outside Seattle that I had bought in 2020 for far less than what it was worth by then. People in my family like to call it my $1.4 million house, usually with the kind of tone that made it sound as though someone had handed it to me in a gift box. I still had a mortgage. I had worked for years in procurement consulting, saved carefully, bought before prices climbed, and renovated the place slowly instead of turning every pay raise into a new car or a bigger vacation. None of that mattered to Mom when she wanted something from me. I set my coffee on the porch railing and walked down toward the driveway. "Nobody is moving into my house," I said. I didn't shout it because I didn't need to. The moving crew had stopped beside the truck and were watching us with the uncomfortable expressions of people who had just realized they had been hired into someone else's family war. Mom gave me a short laugh. "Don't be dramatic. Kayla's rental ends soon, and the children need stability. You have 6 bedrooms sitting empty. 4 of those rooms have uses. An office isn't a child. Neither is a guest room." Kayla closed the back of her SUV harder than necessary. "Can we please not do this in front of them?" I looked at her. "You brought them here." That stopped her for a second. My sister was 34 and had been separated from her husband Daniel since the end of the previous year. Their divorce had been filed in January and was still moving through the slow, unpleasant stage where lawyers exchanged proposals about money, schedules, school logistics, and what life was going to look like once 2 parents who had once shared everything no longer did. Kayla and the kids were staying in a furnished rental near their old school district. I knew it wasn't ideal. I also knew the rental had not expired that morning, despite the picture Mom was trying to paint. Mom stepped closer. "Her children need a real home. They have a roof over their heads. For a few more weeks, then Kayla can find another place." Kayla's face tightened. "You make everything sound so simple." "No, I make ownership sound simple. This is my house." Mom folded her arms. "Family doesn't talk like that. Family also doesn't arrive with a moving truck before asking." "We did ask." I stared at her. Mom corrected herself without blinking. "We discussed it." "No. You told me last week that Kayla was having trouble finding something she liked. I said I hoped she found a place." "That's not a housing agreement." Kayla glanced at Mom. That look was small, but I caught it. Then Kayla said, "Mom said you were going to be upset at first." I turned toward her. "At first? She said you'd come around. Did I ever tell you that?" Kayla didn't answer immediately. Mom jumped in. "Lydia, stop interrogating your sister." "I'm not interrogating her. I'm asking whether she heard the word yes come out of my mouth." Mia shifted the box in her arms. Caleb, who was 8, had stopped looking at the moving truck and was now watching his mother. 5-year-old Lily was holding Kayla's hand and staring at the front steps like she wasn't sure whether she was allowed to move. I hated that they were standing there for any of this. I loved those kids. I had picked Mia up from school when Kayla got stuck at work. I had once been listed as an emergency pickup contact, which meant I had signed the school forms allowing me to take her home if Kayla or Daniel couldn't get there. I had bought Mia her first laptop for school, helped Kayla build a ridiculous cardboard volcano, and let Lily decorate my refrigerator with drawings that looked mostly like purple clouds. Loving them had never meant their mother owned my bedrooms. Kayla lifted one of the boxes from the ground. "I'm not doing this out here." She started toward the front door. I moved before Mom could say anything else. I stepped onto the walkway and planted myself between Kayla and the porch. There was no shoving, no grabbing, no screaming. I just stood there and looked directly at my sister. "Don't bring a single thing inside." Kayla stopped. Mom scoffed behind her. "And who's going to stop us?" I looked past Kayla at her. "I am." The movers had gone completely still. Mom shook her head with the disgusted little smile she used whenever she wanted to make me feel childish. "What are you going to do, Lydia? Call the police on your own sister in front of her children?" "I don't need to call the police. I need everyone to understand that nobody has permission to enter my house or unload anything onto my property." One of the movers cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if you're the homeowner and you're saying not to unload, we're not unloading." Mom turned on him. "She knows we're supposed to be here." He lifted both hands. "I'm not getting involved. I'm just telling you what we can and can't do." That irritated Mom more than anything I had said. Then Mia spoke. "Aunt Lydia?" Her voice was so quiet that every adult stopped. I looked at her. She glanced past me toward the upstairs windows. "Grandma said I could have the room at the end of the hall because it has the big window." I felt something hard settle in my chest. Mom had not merely told Kayla I would agree. She had walked the children through an imaginary future inside my house. She had assigned rooms. Mia looked down at the box in her arms. "Did you change your mind?" I went over to her and lowered my voice. "No, honey. I didn't change my mind." Her forehead creased. "No one should have promised you a room in my house without asking me first." Mom inhaled sharply. "Don't involve her." I turned my head. "You already did." Kayla took the box from Mia and set it back beside the SUV. There was embarrassment on her face now, but also anger, and I couldn't tell which one was aimed at me. "Lydia," she said. Mom told me everything had been handled. That wording caught my attention. "Handled how?" Kayla looked at Susan. Mom said, "She means we talked about it." "No. She said everything had been handled." "You're twisting words." I might have continued arguing if I hadn't remembered the voicemail. It had come in late Thursday afternoon from a woman who identified herself as an attorney working on Kayla's divorce. The message had been brief and almost bureaucratic. She wanted to confirm information related to a housing document naming my address. She hadn't explained much more than that, and because I'd been finishing a client review when the message arrived, I'd told myself I would return the call at the beginning of the next week. I hadn't imagined that 48 hours later, my driveway would be filled with boxes. I pulled my phone from my pocket. Mom immediately said, "What are you doing?" "Returning a call." "From who?" I found the number in my voicemail history. Kayla's expression changed before I even pressed it. Mom stepped toward me. "Lydia, don't start making this bigger than it is." I looked at her. "I don't know how big it is yet." I called. Because it was Saturday, I expected voicemail. Instead, after a few rings, the call rolled through to an answering service, and within several minutes, I received a return call from the attorney herself. She apologized for catching me on a weekend, but said she had seen my missed call and assumed I was responding to the message she'd left. I put the call on speaker. "Yes," I said. "I'm calling about the housing document you mentioned." Mom's face went completely still. Kayla looked between us. The attorney spoke carefully. "I want to be clear that I can't discuss privileged details of your sister's representation. I only need to confirm a statement attributed to you." "Okay." We were provided with a housing declaration indicating that you had agreed to allow Kayla Bennett and her 3 children to reside at your property on a long-term basis. Before anyone relies on that declaration in ongoing discussions, I need to verify whether you signed it. For the first time since the moving truck arrived, nobody in my driveway said anything. I looked at Kayla. She looked stunned. Then I looked at Mom. She wasn't stunned at all. "No," I said. "I did not sign anything agreeing to let my sister live here." The attorney paused. "And you have not given written authorization for that arrangement?" "No. Thank you. That's all I needed to confirm at this point. I'll make a note that you've denied signing the declaration, and I would recommend that you not make any assumptions about the document until you've seen a copy. Can I get one? There are appropriate ways to address that. If you have counsel, you may want to speak with them. Or I can explain what we can provide once I'm back in the office." Understood. Before I could say anything else, Mom stepped close enough to my phone that her shadow crossed the screen. "Don't answer anything else," she said quietly. I turned my head toward her. The attorney must have heard it because she went silent. Kayla stared at Mom. "Why did you say that?" Mom's eyes flicked toward her. "Because Lydia has a habit of talking before she knows the whole story." I almost laughed. Instead, I picked up my phone and took it off speaker. "Thank you for calling me back. I'll follow up through counsel." I ended the call. For several seconds, all I could hear was the moving truck idling at the curb. Kayla was the first to speak. "What declaration?" Mom snapped. "Not here." That answer told me more than anything else she could have said. Kayla's face tightened. "Mom," Susan pointed toward the SUV. "Get the children back in the car." "No." "What declaration?" Mom looked at me instead. "Are you happy now?" I stared at her. "You think that's the question? You always do this. You take one issue and turn it into some corporate investigation because you can't just act like a normal sister. A normal sister doesn't need to investigate whether someone signed her name. I didn't say anyone signed your name. You knew exactly what the attorney was talking about." Mom's mouth closed. Kayla looked at her again. I saw the moment something shifted between them, even if only by a fraction. Mom recovered quickly. "This is a misunderstanding, that's all." "Then explain it." "Not while the children are standing here." That was the first sensible thing she'd said all morning, even though I didn't believe for a second that concern for the kids was the real reason she wanted the conversation to stop. I turned to the movers. "Nothing gets unloaded here." The driver nodded. Kayla looked as though she wanted to argue, but then Mia took Lily's hand, and whatever Kayla was about to say died in her throat. Mom walked toward her car, furious. "You're going to regret humiliating your sister like this. I didn't bring the truck. You could have handled this privately. I woke up to it in my driveway." She opened her car door and looked back at me. "One day, you're going to understand that people with children don't have the luxury of thinking only about themselves." That one hit exactly where she intended it to, but I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. "I'll think about that after I find out why a lawyer has a housing declaration with my name on it." Mom got into the car. Kayla stayed behind for another moment. I swear I thought she had handled this. I looked at her. "You keep using that word, because that's what she said. Did she ever tell you I had said yes?" Kayla looked toward the car. "No." That answer mattered. "Did you know there was a document?" "She said she had something for the lawyer about where we'd be staying." "Did you read it?" Kayla hesitated. "Not really." I felt my jaw tighten. "You were planning to move 3 children into my house based on paperwork you hadn't read and permission you knew I hadn't given." Her face flushed. "I thought once we were here, you'd see how much we needed it." There it was. Not in a sense. Not exactly deceit either. Something uglier and more familiar. She had believed my affection for her children could be turned into pressure. Kayla gathered Mia and Caleb toward the SUV while Lily climbed into the back seat. Mia looked at me through the open door, still confused, and I gave her the best smile I could manage. "This isn't your fault," I told her. She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. A few minutes later, the moving truck pulled away without unloading a single box. Mom's car followed it, then Kayla's SUV. I stood in the driveway until they disappeared around the corner. My coffee was still on the porch where I'd left it. it had gone cold. I carried it back into the kitchen, locked the front door, and opened the voicemail from Kayla's attorney again. This time, I listened to every word. Until that morning, I had thought the problem was obvious. My mother favored my younger sister. Kayla was going through a divorce. Mom thought my house was wasted on a woman without children, so she decided guilt could do what asking permission couldn't. But the moment Susan heard the words housing declaration, she hadn't looked confused. She had looked afraid. And that was when I stopped wondering how far my mother was willing to push me into sharing my house. I started wondering how far she had already gone using my name. The moving truck was gone by 10:30, but the house still felt invaded. Nothing had crossed the threshold, yet I kept looking at the front door as if I expected another box to appear on the other side. I rinsed out the coffee I had abandoned on the porch, made another cup, and sat at the kitchen island with my phone, a legal pad, and the kind of headache I usually got after 6 straight hours of contract review. Only this time, the document I needed to understand had my name on it, and I had never seen it. Kayla texted me before noon. The first message was 3 paragraphs long and somehow managed to contain an apology, an accusation, and a request that I calm down. She said the kids had been crying in the car. She said Mia thought I hated them. She said Mom had promised her I would be upset for a little while but would eventually understand why this was necessary. Then, halfway through the message, she wrote the line that mattered more than everything around it. Mom told me you hadn't officially said yes yet, but she said you always come around when the kids are involved. She told me she handled the paperwork so we could get the housing issue settled. I read that part twice. Then I took screenshots for convenience, exported the thread so I would have the full conversation with timestamps, and saved it in a folder on my laptop. I didn't reply immediately. If I had answered in the first 5 minutes, I would have said something designed to hurt Kayla, and however deserved that might have felt, it would not have answered the question that mattered. She had known I had not agreed. That changed things. Mom had not fooled Kayla into believing I had invited them. Kayla had known the invitation did not exist. What she apparently believed was that my answer didn't matter yet because Mom would turn it into yes later. I waited until I had calmed down enough to type facts instead of insults. You knew I had not agreed. You still packed your children, hired a truck, and came to my house. I need you to understand that before we talk about anything else. The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. I thought Mom had everything arranged. I wrote back. Arranged with whom? The bubble disappeared. A minute later, it returned. She said you'd complain, then agree once you understood what the kids needed. That was not an answer to my question, and I think Kayla knew it. I put the phone down and called an attorney I had used 2 years earlier to review the consulting agreement for my business. She did not handle family law, but I trusted her judgment, and she gave me the name of a colleague who dealt with civil disputes and document issues. By early afternoon, I was speaking with a lawyer named Eric Nolan. I gave him the shortest version possible. My sister was divorcing, my mother had arrived with a moving truck, a lawyer representing my sister had mentioned a housing declaration attributed to me, and I had never signed any such document. Eric interrupted me exactly once. Does anyone currently live in your house besides you? No. Has your sister ever lived there? No. Has she ever paid you rent? No. Have you given her a key, signed a lease, or told her she can establish residence there? No. Good. Keep it that simple. That answer settled one concern I had not wanted to admit was bothering me. I had spent the morning wondering whether some obscure technicality could turn Mom's audacity into a legal problem I had somehow created by not shouting loudly enough. Eric told me a housing declaration, whatever exact language it contained, did not transfer ownership of my property. It was not a deed. It did not magically make Kayla my tenant simply because someone had typed my address into a document. But if my signature is on it, then we need to see the document before deciding what that means. Don't accuse anyone of forging anything yet. Get the copy. Preserve the messages. Confirm in writing that you did not sign or authorize the declaration. Beyond that, don't speculate. That was exactly the kind of advice I understood. Facts first, conclusions later. I emailed Kayla's attorney that afternoon, copying Eric after receiving his permission. I stated that I had not signed any housing declaration, had never authorized Kayla or her children to establish residence in my home, and would like a copy of the document that had been attributed to me. The response came Monday morning. The attorney thanked me for clarifying, and said she would provide the document through the appropriate channel because she did not intend to rely on it without verification. She also said something that stayed with me. The declaration had raised questions before I ever called. The signature line was not dated clearly, and the contact information attached to my name did not match the information they had seen on another document connected to Mia's school records. That was why she had left me the voicemail Thursday, instead of simply accepting the declaration at face value. I forwarded the email to Eric and went back to work, though I accomplished very little that morning. By 11, Kayla had called 4 times. I let the first 3 go to voicemail. On the 4th, I answered. "Are you trying to get me in trouble with my lawyer?" she asked. There was no hello. "I told your lawyer I didn't sign something I didn't sign. You could have talked to me first. I tried that Saturday. You were walking toward my front door with a box. Because Mom told me this was handled. You keep saying that. Because it was what I believed." "No, Kayla. You believed Mom could make me agree after the fact. That's different." She went quiet. I leaned back in my office chair. "Did you know there was a housing declaration?" "I knew there was some kind of housing letter." "Did you read it?" "Not really." I closed my eyes for a second. "You forwarded a document to your lawyer without reading it?" "Mom sent it to me and said it was what they needed." "That's not an answer. I was dealing with 6 other things at the same time." "Did you read enough to see my name on it?" "Yes." "Did you see a signature?" "I don't remember." I believed that last answer more than I wanted to. Kayla had always moved through paperwork the way some people moved through airport security, annoyed that it existed and relieved when someone else told her what line to stand in. Mom had encouraged that for years. She booked Kayla's appointments when we were teenagers. She filled out college forms with her. She negotiated with landlords. She called insurance companies. She would tell everyone she was helping, then complain that Kayla couldn't function without her. I used to think the problem belonged entirely to Kayla. She was an adult. She could read a form. She could make a phone call. She could learn. Sitting there listening to her tell me she had forwarded a housing document bearing my name without reading it, I still thought she was responsible. But for the first time, I wondered how much of that irresponsibility had been rewarded every time Mom stepped in before Kayla had to feel the consequence of not paying attention. That realization did not make me kinder in the moment. "You're 34 years old," I said. "You have 3 children. You cannot keep signing, forwarding, or acting on things because Mom says they're fine." "I didn't sign anything. You tried to move into my house because she said it was fine. Because I thought you would agree. Eventually." She exhaled hard. "Yes. Eventually, there it was again. Not permission, expectation." I asked, "Where did the document come from?" "Mom emailed it to me." "Forward me the email." "What?" "The original email. Don't copy the text. Forward the whole thing." "Why?" "Because it has my name on it. I don't want you turning this into some huge legal thing." I stared at the wall across from my desk. A document I didn't sign was given to a lawyer as if I signed it. It became a huge legal thing before I knew it existed. Kayla muttered something under her breath. "What did you say?" "I said Daniel is going to use this against me." That was the first time she said his name like he was the real threat. For the next 10 minutes, Kayla told me Daniel had been questioning every part of her housing plan. He wanted to know where the children would sleep, whether they would stay in the same school area, and whether she could afford the arrangement she was proposing. According to her, he was trying to make her look unstable. "Is he asking for sole custody?" I asked. "He keeps saying he wants a realistic parenting plan." That wasn't my question. She hesitated. "No, he's not asking for sole custody." "Then what is he asking for?" "More overnights during the school week if I move farther away." That sounded considerably less sinister than the version Mom had been circulating. "How far is the furnished rental from the school?" "About 20 minutes. "And my house?" "Maybe 12. I let that sit. So this isn't about whether you have a mansion, I said. It's about transportation and where the kids are going to be based. It's not that simple. It probably isn't. But it also isn't Daniel trying to steal your children because you don't own a 6-bedroom house. Mom said his lawyer was going to make a big deal out of housing. Mom says a lot of things. Kayla went quiet again. That afternoon, she forwarded the original email. The sender was Susan Bennett. The subject line read, "Housing document send to your attorney." There was no message beyond. This is what they need. Forward it today. I handled the rest. The attachment was a PDF titled Housing Declaration. I did not open it until Eric called me and confirmed he had received the same copy from Kayla's attorney. Go ahead, he said. Let's look at the same document. I clicked. The declaration was 1 page. It identified me by full name and my property address. It stated that I had agreed to allow Kayla Bennett and her 3 minor children to reside in my home on a long-term basis, while Kayla established financial independence following her marital separation. It described the arrangement as rent-free and stable for the foreseeable future. That phrase made me laugh once, without humor. For the foreseeable future, someone had volunteered my house indefinitely. Eric read silently on the other end of the line. I got to the bottom. My name was typed beneath a signature, and above it was what appeared to be my actual signature. My stomach tightened. It was not somebody's shaky imitation. It wasn't even close enough to make me wonder whether Mom had spent an evening practicing my handwriting. It was perfect. The same long first stroke in the L. The same compressed B. The same slight upward curve where I finished Bennett too quickly. I had signed thousands of documents in my professional life. I knew the difference between somebody drawing my name and somebody using an image of it. That's my signature, I said. Eric answered carefully. It appears to be an image of your signature. I never signed this. I understand. It looks exactly like mine, which may mean someone copied it from another document. That is different from saying, we know who did it or how. Save the file exactly as you received it. Don't edit, rename, or annotate the original. I saved a separate working copy and left the original untouched. I kept looking at the signature until Eric finally told me to stop treating the screen like it was going to confess. It looks like an image of your signature, he said. That doesn't tell us where the image came from, and it doesn't tell us who put it there. But I know I didn't sign this. That's the fact you can stand behind. I hated how unsatisfying that sounded, but he was right. I had spent years reviewing vendor disputes where people lost credibility because they jumped from a suspicious fact to the most dramatic explanation. I wasn't going to make the same mistake simply because this time the document had my name on it. Save the original exactly as you received it, Eric said. Don't annotate it. Don't rename it. Don't send angry messages accusing anybody of forgery. We build from what we can prove. I told him I understood. After we hung up, I went back through Kayla's email. Susan had sent her the housing declaration directly. The subject line was blunt enough to make my stomach tighten again. Housing document send to your attorney. The body contained 1 sentence. This is what they need. Forward it today. I handled the rest. Handled. That word had followed me since the moving truck appeared. Kayla had used it in the driveway. She had used it again in her texts. Mom had apparently used it with her often enough that Kayla treated it like a substitute for understanding what had actually been done. I called Kayla. She answered, sounding defensive before I had said anything. If you're calling to tell me again that I screwed up, I already know. I'm calling because I need the exact chain. What chain? Who gave you the declaration? What they told you about it? And what you believed when you sent it? She exhaled. Mom sent it. Directly? Yes. Did anyone else send you a version first? No. Did she say she had spoken to me? She said she had handled it. That's not the same thing. I know. Did she ever say, Lydia agreed? Kayla was quiet. No. That mattered. I wrote it down. Did you know I had not agreed when you forwarded the document? Another pause. Yes. I closed my eyes. There was no point pretending I hadn't expected that answer. She had already admitted in the driveway that she thought I would change my mind once the children were standing there. Still, hearing her say it that plainly made something inside me harden. So what did you think the declaration was? I thought Mom was getting the paperwork ready for an arrangement that didn't exist. I thought it was going to exist because you thought I would give in. I thought you'd understand once you saw how bad things were. Those are not the same thing. I know. I heard traffic through the phone. Are you driving? I'm parked outside the grocery store. Good. Did you read the declaration before you sent it? I opened it. Did you read it? Not closely. Did you see my name? Yes. The statement that you and the kids could live here long-term and rent-free? I saw enough to know it was about housing. And the signature? I don't remember looking at the bottom. I rubbed my forehead. It was hard to decide which part made me angrier. That someone had attached my signature to the document, or that Kayla had been willing to send it to her attorney, while knowing the agreement itself had never happened. Why did you send it? Because my lawyer kept asking for a stable housing plan. That doesn't answer the question. Because Mom told me it was what they needed. There it was again. Mom said. Mom Hanlil. Mom knew. I said, what exactly is happening with Daniel? Not what Mom says. What is actually happening? Kayla bristled immediately. Why? Because every time housing comes up, you act like you're about to lose your children. He keeps questioning where I'm going to live. Is he asking for sole custody? No. Has he threatened to take the kids away from you? Not in those words. What words? She hesitated. He says if I move farther from school, the weekday schedule may have to change. Meaning? He wants more school night overnights if I'm too far away. That was not nothing. But it was also not the catastrophe Mom had been describing to relatives. How far is your current rental from school? About 20 minutes. And my house? 12, maybe 13. I leaned back in my chair. So this is about logistics. It's about stability. Those aren't opposites. You don't understand family court. You're right. I don't. That's why I'm asking what your lawyer actually said. Kayla didn't answer. What did she say? That I need a realistic housing plan before we finalize the parenting proposal. Did she say you need to own a house? No. Did she say you need 6 bedrooms? No. Did she say Daniel gets the children if you rent? No. I let the silence do the rest. Finally, Kayla said, Mom thinks they're going to use everything against me. Mom isn't your lawyer. I know. You keep saying that after doing exactly what she tells you. Her voice tightened. You don't have to make me feel stupid. I don't have to. But I do need you to understand that this isn't just about Mom anymore. You forwarded the document. I know. And you brought the truck. I know. Then stop telling me the story like you were standing outside it. She didn't respond. I could hear her breathing. After a moment, she said, I was scared. That was probably the most honest explanation she had given me. I softened my voice slightly. I believe you. That doesn't sound like forgiveness. It isn't. She gave a tired laugh. At least you're consistent. Before we hung up, I asked her to forward me the original email from Mom without editing anything. She did. I sent it to Eric along with the declaration and told him what Kayla had confirmed. Susan sent the document directly. Kayla knew I had not agreed. Kayla forwarded it anyway because Susan told her the housing issue had been handled. Eric called me back 10 minutes later. This is useful, he said. Useful how? It establishes the document path better. It doesn't establish who created it. I know. And don't let the family argument distract you from the signature issue. I won't. He paused. Does the signature look like something you commonly use electronically? No. Do you keep a scanned signature file? Not one my mother would have. Then think about ordinary documents she might have legitimately seen. School forms, insurance forms, family paperwork, something you actually signed and sent. The word school caught somewhere in my memory. I didn't know why at first. Then I remembered Mia. 2 years earlier, Kayla had asked me to become one of Mia's emergency pickup contacts. Daniel had been traveling for work, Mom had an appointment she couldn't change, and Kayla wanted another adult authorized in case the school couldn't reach either parent. I had signed something. I remembered printing the form at home because the school's electronic system hadn't accepted it properly. I remembered signing on a clipboard because I had been rushing out the door. I remembered scanning it and emailing it back to Kayla. And I remembered Mom being copied on the family emails around school logistics back then because Susan had been helping with pickups. I sat straighter. Eric. What? I signed a school authorization for Mia a couple of years ago. Did your mother have access to it? I don't know. Possibly. That's different from knowing. I know. Find the original if you can. Don't call anyone yet. After we ended the call, I opened my email archive. I typed Mia's name into the search field. Hundreds of messages appeared. Birthday plans. School fundraisers. Photos. Pickup schedules. A science fair reminder Kayla had forwarded to half the family because Caleb had somehow gotten included on the same thread. I narrowed the date range to 2 years earlier. Then I added the word authorization. The results dropped to 6. My pulse changed. One subject line read, Emergency Pickup Form Maya. I didn't open it. Not yet. I sat there staring at the search result while the housing declaration remained open on the other side of my screen. The signature at the bottom of that declaration had looked too perfect, because it probably was perfect. It looked less like someone had copied the way I signed my name, and more like someone had copied the signature itself. If the school form contained the same image, I would have something more concrete than instinct. I would know where the signature might have come from. And more importantly, I would know who had been in a position to access it. For the first time since the moving truck arrived, I wasn't thinking about the bedrooms, the divorce, or even whether Kayla had believed she could pressure me into changing my mind. I was thinking about one ordinary school form from 2 years earlier, and whether my mother had turned it into permission I had never given. By Wednesday night, I had 2 documents open side by side on my laptop. On the left was the housing declaration Mom had sent to Kayla. On the right was the emergency pickup authorization I had signed for Mia 2 years earlier. I enlarged both until the signatures filled most of the screen. The same long stroke on the L, the same cramped B, the same tiny break in the ink just before the final letters of Bennett. I didn't need software to tell me what I was looking at. Whoever had put my signature on the housing declaration had not tried to imitate it. They had copied the image from the school form. I called Eric before I called anyone in my family. That had become my rule over the previous few days. Facts before confrontation. I emailed him both original files and told him where the school authorization had come from. He agreed the signatures appeared identical, but he reminded me again not to turn an obvious inference into a claim I could not yet prove. Mom had access to the school form. Mom had sent the housing declaration to Kayla. Mom had known I had never agreed to the arrangement. Those facts mattered. Whether she had personally opened a PDF editor and pasted my signature onto the page was a different question. Don't give her an accusation she can argue with, Eric told me. Ask questions. Preserve answers. That irritated me because I already knew he was right. My profession had trained me to distrust convenient certainty. If a vendor missed a deadline, I didn't write that they had deliberately sabotaged a project because the sentence felt satisfying. I documented the missed deadline, the emails, the promised delivery date, and the consequences. Yet with Mom, I wanted to skip all of that. I wanted to call and say, I know what you did. Instead, I called Kayla. She answered on the second ring. If this is about Mom again, I don't know anything else. It is about Mom, and I need you to tell me exactly what happened with the housing declaration. I already did. You told me she emailed it to you. Start before that, Kayla sighed. I could hear traffic in the background, then the click of a turn signal. I'm pulling over. Good. A minute later, the noise stopped. Okay, she said. What do you want to know? When did she first tell you there would be a housing document? There was a pause while she thought. Maybe a week before we came to your house. I told her my lawyer kept asking what my plan was after the furnished rental ended. Mom said she would put something together. Did she say she had talked to me? Not exactly. Kyla, she said you were being stubborn. That sounds like I hadn't agreed. I knew you hadn't said yes yet. There it was, stated plainly enough that neither of us could hide behind wording anymore. I asked, "Then what did you think the document was?" I thought it was something that described the arrangement we were going to have. The arrangement I hadn't agreed to. I know how it sounds. It sounds accurate. Her voice sharpened. I'm not saying I handled it well. That's not what I'm asking. Did Mom tell you the declaration was signed? No. Did you open it before you forwarded it? I opened it on my phone. And? I skimmed it. I rubbed my forehead. Did you see my name at the bottom? Yes. Did you see the signature? I don't remember looking closely at it. You forwarded a document with my name on it to your lawyer, while knowing I had not agreed to what it said. I thought Mom was trying to get everything ready so that once you agreed, we wouldn't lose more time. Except you sent it before I agreed. She didn't answer. I let the silence stay between us. Finally, Kayla said, Mom told me not to overthink it. I laughed once, and there was nothing funny in it. Of course she did. She said lawyers always wanted paperwork, and that this was just to show where the kids would be staying. Where she had decided they would be staying. Yes. The honesty surprised me enough that I didn't immediately respond. Kayla went on. She said you would be angry. She said you'd give a speech about boundaries and ownership, and then Mia would look at you and you'd realize you couldn't really make us leave. I stared at the school form on my screen. So she knew I hadn't said yes. Yes. And you knew. Yes. I hated that answer, but I preferred it to another excuse. Forward me everything Mom sent you about the house, I said. Not just the PDF. The messages, too. Why? Because I want the original thread. I don't want this turning into something that hurts me in the divorce. Then you should have read the document before you sent it to your lawyer. I said I know. No. You keep saying you know now. I'm trying to figure out what you knew then. She was quiet for several seconds. Fine, I'll send it. The messages arrived 20 minutes later. There were more than I expected. Most were ordinary. Mom sending rental listings and complaining that everything decent was overpriced. Mom suggesting school districts. Mom telling Kayla to stop worrying because family solves family problems. Then, 6 days before the moving truck arrived, the tone changed. Susan, I spoke to everyone I needed to speak to. Stop stressing. Kayla, did Lydia finally agree? Susan, she will. She always makes a production out of things first. Kayla, I don't want to show up there if she says no. Susan, once she sees the kids and understands this is real, she'll come around. The next day, Susan, I handled the paperwork. Your lawyer needs proof of stable housing, so send the document I emailed you. Kayla, does Lydia know you're doing this? Susan, Lydia knows what the family needs. Don't turn this into another debate. That was the closest Mom had come to admitting, in writing, that she knew I had not consented. I saved the original messages and sent copies to Eric. What struck me wasn't how clever Mom had been. It was how little she had bothered to hide her thinking from Kayla. She didn't believe she needed my permission before making plans. She believed permission was the final ceremonial step, something I would supply once resistance became inconvenient enough. I called Mom the next morning. She answered with, Have you finally calmed down? I found the school authorization. There was a pause. What school authorization? The emergency pickup form I signed for Mia 2 years ago. I don't keep track of every form you sign. You were copied on it. So? The signature on that form is identical to the one on the housing declaration. She exhaled through her nose. Lydia, I'm not doing this with you. I'm asking you one question. Did you use the signature from that form? No. The answer came faster than I expected. Did you create the housing declaration? I put together information Kayla needed. That wasn't the question. You sound ridiculous. Did you create the document? I helped my daughter prepare what her lawyer asked for. Did you put my signature on it? You are obsessed with the wrong part of this. I looked down at the 2 documents again. Which part should I be obsessed with? The children. That's not an answer. They needed stable housing. Kayla needed something she could present to her lawyer. You have more space than you could ever use, and instead of helping, You're treating this like someone broke into Fort Knox. My signature isn't a family supply. Oh, please. Did you put it on the declaration? Mom's tone changed. The irritation stayed, but underneath it was something colder. A signature is not the point. The children are the point. I wrote the sentence down. Not because I thought it was a confession. Eric had warned me against that kind of wishful interpretation. Mom could later say she was speaking generally, but it told me something more important about how she viewed the situation. She believed the purpose of the document mattered more than whether I had agreed to it. You don't get to decide that, I said. I already told you, I didn't forge anything. I didn't use that word, because you're trying to get me to. I'm trying to get you to answer a simple question. She laughed sharply. This is what you do. You make everything clinical. Contracts, signatures, permissions. Kayla is scared out of her mind. Her marriage is falling apart. And you think the important issue is whether a line on a piece of paper came from the right form. The important issue is that I said no, and you acted like my answer was temporary, because your answer was selfish. There it was. Not confusion, not misunderstanding, judgment. In Mom's mind, once she decided my answer was morally wrong, she was free to work around it. I said, I'm done talking about this without my lawyer involved. You called a lawyer against your own mother? I called a lawyer because my name appeared on a document I didn't authorize. You always have to make yourself the victim. I woke up Saturday with a moving truck in my driveway. And your sister woke up not knowing where her children are going to live. She has a rental for several more weeks. For now. Then she needs a plan that doesn't involve taking my house. Mom went silent again. When she spoke, her voice was quieter. You know what your problem is? You've never had children, so everything stays theoretical for you. You can afford to say no, because nobody depends on you. I almost reminded her that people depended on me every day. Clients, employees on projects, friends, Mia when she needed an emergency pickup. But that wasn't the argument. I don't need children to understand consent, I said. Then I ended the call. By lunchtime, Aunt Denise had called again. This time she wasn't the only one. A cousin texted me asking if it was true Kayla and the kids were basically homeless. Another relative wanted to know why I was lawyering up against Mom. I never asked who had told them. I didn't need to. I answered Denise because she was the only person who seemed interested in facts, rather than entertainment. Your mother says Kayla has nowhere to go after next week, she told me. Her furnished rental runs for several more weeks. She told me it was ending. It is ending eventually. That isn't the same thing as 3 children being homeless Saturday morning. Denise hesitated. Did you tell Kayla she could move in? No. Not even temporarily? No. Did Susan think you had? She knew I hadn't agreed. That changed Denise's tone. What about the paper she mentioned? I leaned back in my chair. There is a document with my signature on it that I didn't sign. That's all I'm discussing with family. Oh, exactly. She lowered her voice even though there was no reason to. Do you think Susan made it? I think Susan sent it to Kayla. I think she had access to the document my signature appears to have been copied from. Those are facts. I'm not going beyond them yet. Denise was quiet. Then she said, That's probably smart. A year earlier, I might have spent 20 minutes proving I was a good aunt. I might have listed every birthday, every school pickup, every holiday gift, every favor. That week, I finally understood how useless that instinct was. The accusation wasn't actually that I didn't love the children. The accusation was that love should make my answer irrelevant. I stopped defending myself against that. By Friday, Eric had everything I had collected. The housing declaration, the school authorization, Mom's email to Kayla, the message thread, and my written denial. He sent a short formal notice confirming that I had not signed or authorized the housing declaration and that no one had permission to establish residence in my property. There were no threats about prison, no dramatic demand for arrests, just a clean record of what I had and had not agreed to. That bothered Mom far more than shouting would have. She texted me that night. You have humiliated this family over a misunderstanding. I didn't answer. A minute later, Your sister is terrified she will lose time with her children because she doesn't have a stable home. Still, I didn't answer. Then, I hope your paperwork keeps you warm when you realize what you've done. I saved the message and put my phone face down. The next morning, Kayla asked if we could talk. She sounded different. Less angry, more tired. Daniel's lawyer asked for updated housing information, she said. Okay, my lawyer says I need an actual plan now. That makes sense. I know you're going to say I should have had one already. I wasn't going to say anything. That's somehow worse. I almost smiled. She sighed. The rental is expensive. If I extend it another month, I'm burning money. Then find something longer term. Everything near the school is insane. What's your budget? She didn't answer. I waited. Kyla, I don't know exactly. That surprised me more than it should have. How do you not know your housing budget? Because the divorce isn't finished. That doesn't mean you have no idea what money you have. You don't understand how complicated this is. Probably not. But I know the house you and Daniel owned sold in February. Silence. I sat straighter. What? Nothing. No, that's not nothing. You told Mom you walked away with almost nothing. I did. Did you? What is this? Another investigation. I am asking because 4 days ago you tried to move into my house as if you had no other option. I don't have another good option. That's different. She inhaled slowly. I remembered seeing the listing disappear months earlier. Kayla had mentioned the sale during one of the few family dinners we'd managed after the separation. She had made it sound like the mortgage and fees swallowed most of the equity. I hadn't asked for numbers because it wasn't my business. It became my business when her solution was my house. How much did you receive when the house sold? I asked. I don't want to talk about that. Then don't. But stop telling me you had no choice. I never said no choice. You arrived with a moving truck. She didn't respond. I lowered my voice. Was your share more than 50,000? She said nothing. More than 100? Lydia. That was enough to tell me I was finally asking the right question. How much? It was around $168. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. $168,000? Approximately. I stood up from my desk and walked to the window. 4 days earlier, Mom had stood in my driveway, telling me Kayla needed my house because she had children and I didn't. Kayla had stood beside her, acting like a short-term rental was the last place between her kids and homelessness. Where is it? I asked. It's not that simple. Is it gone? No. Then where is it? Another long silence. When Kayla finally answered, her voice was barely above a whisper. Mom has it. I turned away from the window. What do you mean Mom has it? I mean I didn't want it sitting in my checking account while everything with Daniel was still unsettled. Mom said she'd keep most of it safe until I knew what I was doing. I felt the entire story shift underneath me. The housing declaration was still serious. My signature was still on a document I had never authorized. But for the first time, I saw another possibility behind the moving truck. If Kayla had received nearly $170,000 and still believed she couldn't secure housing without taking mine, then the question was no longer simply why Mom felt entitled to my house. The question was what had happened to Kayla's money. Kayla refused to explain the money over the phone. She said she was tired of feeling interrogated, and for once I agreed that a conversation about $168,000 deserved more than 10 minutes between her errands and my client calls. We met the next afternoon at a quiet cafe halfway between her furnished rental and my office. I chose a table near the back, away from the lunch crowd. Kayla arrived 7 minutes late, carrying the same oversized purse she had been dragging around since the separation began, dropped into the chair across from me, and looked at the legal pad beside my coffee. Seriously? She asked. I closed it and slid it into my bag. Fine. No notes. She stared at me another second, then said, You make everything feel like a deposition. I told her I wasn't trying to win a case against her. I was trying to understand how someone who had received more than $160,000 from the sale of a house had ended up standing in my driveway acting like my spare bedrooms were her only remaining option. Kayla looked exhausted. Not theatrically exhausted, Not the kind Mom performed when she wanted everyone to notice how much she carried. Kayla had dark circles under her eyes, an untouched manicure growing out at the cuticles, and a crease between her eyebrows that seemed permanent. She wrapped both hands around her coffee and said, "The divorce isn't finished." I told her I knew that. She said it again anyway, as if she had rehearsed the sentence for anyone who questioned her finances. Daniel and I filed in January. We still don't have a final parenting plan. We still haven't finalized support. There are expenses going back and forth. The house was only one piece. I asked her to explain that piece, and this time she did. The marital house had sold in February, under a written interim agreement between her and Daniel. They had both wanted it sold, rather than paying another year of mortgage, insurance, maintenance, and taxes on a property neither could comfortably carry alone. After the mortgage and closing costs were paid, there was enough equity for both of them to receive an agreed provisional distribution while the rest of the divorce continued. Kayla's share had been just under $168,000. The money was real. It had been transferred to her. It had not vanished into some mysterious court account. And Daniel had not taken it from her. She still had to disclose it accurately as the divorce moved forward, and whatever remained unresolved between them would be handled through the settlement process. But the basic fact was simple. Kayla had received the money. "What did you do with it?" I asked. She looked down at the table. "I kept some." "How much?" "About $18,000. That number was so specific that I knew there was more." "And the rest?" "Mom told me not to leave it sitting in my checking account." I felt my jaw tighten, but I kept my voice even. Why? Because I was stressed. Because I was spending more than I thought on the rental and the lawyer and the kids. Because every time Daniel asked for another financial document, I panicked that I was going to make some mistake and lose everything. "Your lawyer told you to move the money to Mom?" "No." "Your accountant?" "I don't have an accountant." "So, Mom." Kayla gave me a look. "Yes, Mom." She explained that Susan had suggested opening a joint savings account in both their names. According to Mom, it would keep the bulk of the money separate from Kayla's daily spending, while still allowing Kayla access whenever she needed it. Kayla had deposited about $150,000 into that account and left roughly $18,000 in her own checking account for the furnished rental, lawyer bills, groceries, school expenses, and whatever else came up during the first chaotic months of the separation. "Do you have access to the joint account?" I asked. "Of course." "Do you check it?" She looked away. That was an answer. "Kyla, I checked it when I opened it." "That was when?" "February. And since then, Mom sends me updates." "What kind of updates?" "She tells me it's fine." I stared at her. She became defensive immediately. "What?" "Nothing." Don't what?" "Do that face." "I don't know what face you're talking about." "The one where you're thinking I'm an idiot." I sat back. "I think you're 34 years old and you handed $150,000 to another adult, then stopped looking at the balance because she told you it was fine." Her cheeks reddened. "She's our mother." That doesn't answer anything I just said. "She wasn't some stranger. Neither am I. And you still don't get to put my signature on paperwork." Her expression changed. I knew I had hit too hard, and part of me was satisfied by it. That was the part of myself I wasn't particularly proud of. I had spent so many years watching Kayla hand responsibility to Mom that I had started treating dependency like a character defect, instead of a habit that had been encouraged every time someone rescued her before she had to develop the skill herself. Kayla leaned closer. "You know what? You think because you do everything alone, everyone else should too. I don't do everything alone. You act like you do. That's not the same thing. You never ask anybody for anything. I ask people for things all the time. I just don't let them run my bank account." She flinched, and I knew immediately that the sentence had crossed from honest into cruel. I could have stopped. Instead, I kept going. "You don't need my house, Kayla. You need to learn how to live without Mom arranging your life." Her face went still. For several seconds, I thought she was going to get up and leave. Instead, she looked at me and said very quietly, "You think Mom gave me everything." I didn't answer. "She did," Kayla said. "That was the problem. The line stayed with me because I had never heard her describe our mother that way before. Kayla looked toward the window. You remember when I went away to college? Yes. Mom called my roommate twice the first month because I wasn't answering fast enough. I vaguely remembered hearing about an argument, but not the details. She picked my classes with me. She called financial aid when I didn't understand something. When I got my first apartment, she talked to the landlord because she didn't trust me to negotiate the lease. When Daniel and I got married, she knew our mortgage payment before I did, because she sat there with the broker and asked every question. When Mia was born, she had opinions about doctors, daycare, sleep schedules, everything. And every time I tried to tell her I could do something myself, she'd say she was only helping because I was overwhelmed. Then why did you keep letting her? Kayla gave me a bitter smile. Because it's easy to get used to someone making the scary decisions for you. I didn't like the answer because I understood it more than I wanted to. She went on. You got the opposite version of her. She always told you that you were capable. If you had a problem, she'd say, Lydia will figure it out. You hated it, but you figured it out. When I had a problem, she'd step in before I could. I still don't think that excuses the moving truck. I didn't say it does. Or the document. I didn't say that either. For the first time since this began, we were having a conversation where Kayla wasn't asking me to erase her choices by blaming Mom. That didn't make me trust her. It made me listen. I asked, do you understand why your lawyer needed a real housing plan? Yes. Not a 6-bedroom house. A real plan. Yes. The divorce had become distorted in the family retelling. Mom kept talking as if Daniel could walk into court, point at Kayla's temporary rental, and walk out with all 3 children. What Kayla's own lawyer had actually told her was much less dramatic. They needed a realistic proposal for where she would live, whether the children could maintain practical school routines, what transportation would look like, and how expenses fit with the parenting schedule they were negotiating. Daniel was not demanding that Kayla buy a house. He was not insisting that she live in my neighborhood. He had argued that if Kayla moved significantly farther from the children's school, their weekday schedule might need to change. That was not the same as threatening to take them away. Why didn't you tell me that before? I asked. Because Mom kept saying once Daniel saw I didn't have a permanent place, he'd push for more time. He might push for a schedule that makes sense. That's what my lawyer said. And? Kayla picked at the cardboard sleeve around her cup. Mom said my lawyer was being naive. I almost laughed. Of course she did. You don't have to enjoy this. I'm not enjoying it. You look like you are. I look like someone realizing Mom has been translating your divorce into whatever version makes you most dependent on her. Kayla met my eyes. That was the first moment I saw real fear. Not the fear she had used on my driveway about housing and children, but the fear of looking directly at something she had spent years refusing to examine. I asked, why did Mom want you in my house specifically? Because it keeps the kids close to school, because you have space, because I wouldn't have to pay rent for a while. That last part mattered. For a while? Kayla shrugged. How long was the plan? I don't know. The declaration said long-term. I know that now. Did Mom ever tell you when you were supposed to leave? No. Did you have a savings target? 6 months? A year? No. So the plan was, you move in, pay no rent, and then someday everyone figures out what happens next. She frowned. When you say it like that, that's what it was. She didn't argue. I thought about the $150,000 again. If it was sitting untouched in a joint savings account, there was no reason Kayla couldn't extend the rental, put down a deposit on a townhouse, or at least build a realistic budget while the divorce proceeded. Maybe she couldn't buy another house immediately. Maybe keeping all 3 kids in the same school zone would be expensive, but expensive was not the same as impossible. Open the account, I said. Kayla blinked. What? The joint savings account. Why? Because this entire conversation changes depending on whether there's $150,000 sitting in it. She looked offended. Mom said it's fine. I know what Mom said. You're trying to make me suspicious of her. No. I'm telling you to look at your own money. She leaned back. I don't have my laptop. You have your phone. I don't remember the password. Then reset it. Her expression tightened again. You really can't stop, can you? Stop what? Taking over. That landed. I had been criticizing her for letting Mom handle everything, and within 20 minutes, I had shifted into my own version of the same behavior. Different tone, same instinct. I saw a problem and immediately started issuing steps. I put my hands flat on the table. You're right. Kayla looked suspicious. About what? I shouldn't tell you what to do with your account. She didn't say anything. I think you should check it. But it's your money. You decide. That seemed to unsettle her more than the pressure had. So what, you just leave? No. If you want me to sit here while you figure it out, I will. If you want help reading a statement, I'll help. But I'm not calling Mom for you, and I'm not logging into anything for you. Kayla stared down at her coffee. After a long minute, she said, I need to think. Okay. I meant it. That was harder than it sounds. My instinct was to solve the next problem immediately. Call the bank. Pull statements. Build a timeline. Compare the transfer dates with Mom's messages. But none of that was mine to do unless Kayla chose to do it herself. We left the cafe separately. That evening, Mom called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won. What did you say to Kayla? She demanded. Hello to you too. She just called asking about statements. That told me Kayla had made her decision. I didn't make her ask. You put this in her head. It's her account. She is in the middle of a divorce. She does not need you making her panic about money. Why would checking a balance make her panic? Mom paused. A small pause. Barely there. But I noticed it. Because she doesn't understand finances the way you do, Mom said. Then maybe someone should help her understand instead of telling her not to look. I have been protecting that money. Good. Then this should be an easy conversation. Don't be smug. I asked one question. You never ask one question. You pull at everything until you've made everyone miserable. I looked out my kitchen window at the driveway where the moving truck had been less than a week earlier. Is Kayla's money still there? Mom's voice turned cold. You have no right to interrogate me about your sister's finances. You're right. I don't. That surprised her into silence. Kayla does. Mom recovered. I will talk to her. Then talk to her. I hung up. 2 hours later, Kayla texted me. She had asked Mom for the current balance and the statements. Susan had not sent either. Instead, Mom replied that the bank paperwork was a mess and they should sit down together over the weekend. Then she said some of the money might be in a different place because she had been keeping it productive. I read the screenshot 3 times. Keeping it productive. That was not the language you used about cash you were simply holding for someone else. I called Kayla. She answered immediately. What does she mean by a different place? She asked. I don't know. You think she moved it? I don't know. You always have an answer. Not this time. Her breathing sounded uneven. Can you call her? No. Lydia. No. There was a beat of silence. I don't mean that to punish you, I said. But this is exactly what we were talking about. It's your money. You have to ask the question. What if she gets angry? She probably will. That's not helpful. It's honest. Kayla gave a nervous laugh that almost broke into something else. Then she said, What do I ask? I stopped myself before giving her a script. Ask whatever you need to know. Another silence. Finally, she said, I need to know how much is left. Then ask that. She hung up. 20 minutes later, she sent me Susan's response. We need to talk about that. No number. No balance. No reassurance that the money was untouched. Just 6 words. I didn't tell Kayla what I was thinking because I didn't know enough yet. I had spent the entire week reminding myself not to turn suspicion into fact. But that night, for the first time, I stopped thinking of Mom's demand for my house as simple favoritism. If Kayla had $150,000 safely available, then Susan had no reason to be desperate enough to arrive at my home with a moving truck and 3 children. If that money wasn't available, everything changed. And Susan's refusal to answer one very simple question made me wonder whether the house she had been trying so hard to give away was never really the thing she was trying to protect. Kayla called me the next morning before I had finished my first cup of coffee. Her voice was low and tight, the way people sound when they are trying not to wake children in the next room or trying not to admit they are scared. I need you to talk to Mom. I closed my eyes. No. Lydia, please. No. You're the one who started this. I told you to look at your own money. And now I'm looking at it. Good. Don't do that. Do what? Act like I'm passing some test. I set my mug down. I'm not testing you. It feels like you are. Kayla, if I call Mom and demand answers for you, then nothing has changed. She handles your life. Or I handle your life. Either way, you're still standing in the middle waiting for somebody else to do the hard part. She was silent long enough for me to hear Lily talking somewhere in the background. Then Kayla said, I don't know what I'm supposed to say to her. You already said it. You want to know how much of your money is left. She's going to make it into a fight, probably. You're really not going to call her. No. The answer felt harsher than I intended, so I softened my voice without changing it. I will sit with you while you look at the account. I will help you read the statements if you want. I will help you make a list of questions. But I am not going to call Mom and ask her where your money went. Kayla Saihu, can you come over? That surprised me. I had expected another argument. To the rental? Yes. When? After I take the kids to school. I can be there at 10. Okay. When I arrived, the furnished rental looked exactly like temporary housing always does. Neutral couch, neutral art, neutral lamps, nothing personal except the things the children had brought with them. Mia's backpack hung over a dining chair. Caleb's shoes were under the coffee table. Lily had lined up 3 stuffed animals on the windowsill as if she were trying to convince herself they belonged there. Kayla had her laptop open at the dining table. I couldn't get into the account, she said before I sat down. Why not? I forgot the password. Reshatit. I tried. It wanted a verification code sent to Mom's phone. That got my attention. Is the account joint? Yes. Do you have your own login? I thought I did. Did you ever set one up? She looked embarrassed. Mom did most of it. There it was again. I almost said something sharp, but stopped myself. Okay, call the bank. Kayla looked at me. I held up a hand. You call. Not me. She gave me a look but picked up her phone. The call took longer than either of us expected. Security questions, identity verification, account numbers, an old address, then a second verification process because Kayla had never set up independent online access. I sat there and said nothing while she answered. When she got frustrated, I didn't take the phone. When she looked at me like she wanted me to explain something, I made myself wait until she asked. Eventually, the representative confirmed what mattered. Kayla was a joint owner. She had full legal access to the account records. They helped her create her own credentials and told her where to download statements. She thanked them, hung up, and stared at the laptop. Now what? Now you log in. I know that. I waited. She typed the new credentials. The account loaded. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I saw the balance before she did. $16,482. Kayla stared at it. No. I said nothing. She refreshed the page. The number did not change. No. She clicked out and back in again. Same balance. Her face drained of color. That's wrong. Download the statements. She looked at me. I'll sit here. Her fingers shook as she clicked through the account menu. The first statement was February. The opening deposit was there, $150,000. Then March. Still over $140,000. Then early April. A transfer. $96,000. Kayla leaned closer to the screen. What is that? The description included a reference to a home equity line payment. I didn't recognize the account number. Kayla dit. Oh my God. What? That's Mom and Dad's HELOC. I turned toward her. You're sure? Yes. How do you know? Because I saw the account when they refinanced a few years ago. Mom was complaining about the paperwork. She scrolled back and forth as if the numbers might rearrange themselves if she looked at them from a different angle. $96,000. Gone from Kayla's joint savings. Applied toward the line of credit on my parents' house. I felt anger rise in me, but this wasn't my money. I looked at Kayla. Her eyes were fixed on the screen. Keep going. She nodded. There were more withdrawals. Not one enormous transfer, but smaller ones spread across several weeks. 9,000, 11,000, 6,000, 12,000. Some labeled as credit card payments. One looked like a property tax payment. Another was tied to an insurance bill. Kayla added them on her phone calculator. She stopped when the total crossed 38,000. Then she looked back at the current balance. She used almost all of it. I didn't answer. She used almost all of it. I see that. Why? I don't know. Kayla pushed away from the table so suddenly the chair scraped hard against the floor. She told me it was safe. I stayed seated. She told me not to worry about it, Kayla said. She said putting it in that account would keep me from doing anything stupid. I could have told her the obvious. I didn't. Instead, I said, call her. Kayla stared at me. You said you wouldn't call. I won't. What am I supposed to say? Whatever you need to say. She paced into the living room. I could see her fighting the same habit that had controlled her for years. She wanted instructions, a script, a perfect sequence. I kept my mouth shut. Finally, she called. Mom answered quickly. Kayla put the phone on speaker without asking me, but I didn't object. Hey, honey, Mom said. Are the kids at school? Kayla's voice came out flatter than I expected. Why is there only $16,000 left in the account? Silence. Not static. Not a dropped connection. Silence. Then Mom said, Where are you? At the rental. Is Lydia there? Kayla looked at me. Yes. Mom exhaled sharply. I knew it. Kayla's face changed. Knew what? That she was filling your head with this. She didn't log into the account. I did. Because she made you panic. Why is there $16,000 left? Mom ignored the question. This is exactly why I told you not to get Lydia involved. She doesn't understand what we're trying to protect. Kayla raised her voice. It's my money. Mom's tone hardened. And I was protecting it. By spending it, I did not spend it. Kayla laughed once, shocked and angry. $96,000 went to your HELOC. It was temporary. Temporary? Yes. Then put it back. Mom didn't answer. Kayla stood completely still. Put it back. I can't do that today. Why not? Because money doesn't move around that simply. I almost said something but stopped myself. This was Kayla's conversation. How much did you use? She asked. I borrowed some. How much? Kayla, lower your voice. How much? You're upset. Yes. Then we should talk when you're calmer. How much? Mom's voice changed again. Less defensive. More managerial. I used what was necessary to stabilize things here. What things? The house. Bills. The HELOC. Your father has had a difficult year. Kayla looked at me. I didn't react. Did Dad know? She asked. Mom paused. We are not dragging your father into this. Did he know? This is not a phone conversation. Kayla pressed her palm against the table. Mom, you told me you were keeping my money safe. I was. You used $134,000. That number is not fair. It's on the statements. Those payments protected family assets. Kayla stared at the speaker as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Whose family assets? Mom said nothing. Mine? Eventually. No. Your house. That house is where your father and I live. And my money paid your debt. It is not that simple. It was the same phrase again. Always complicated when the numbers stopped supporting Mom. Kayla's voice dropped. Did you plan to tell me? Of course. When? When things were settled? What things? Your divorce? Your housing? Everything. And if I needed the money before then? You didn't. Kayla laughed again, but this time it sounded close to breaking. I needed housing. Which is why I arranged the situation with Lydia. Everything in the room seemed to go still. There it was. Not an accident. Not two unrelated family problems. A bridge between them. Kayla looked at me. Mom kept talking. If Lydia had just acted like a sister, none of this would be happening. You would have had a stable place to live? the kids would have stayed close to school, and we would have had time to put everything back. I felt a cold kind of clarity settle over me. The house, the money, the timing, the moving truck. Mom had not been trying only to give Kayla something she thought I didn't deserve. She had been buying time. Kayla said, "You were going to move me into Lydia's house so I wouldn't ask for my money." That is not what I said. It's exactly what you just said. I said you needed stability. You used my money. I borrowed it. Without asking, you were overwhelmed. I was overwhelmed. So you took my money? Don't twist this. Kayla's face crumpled for 1 second, then hardened again. How are you going to pay it back? Mom didn't answer. How? I had a plan. What plan? That is between me and your father. No, not anymore. Mom's voice went cold. You need to stop letting Lydia turn you against me. Kayla flinched. I saw it. That sentence still had power over her. For most of her life, Mom had made independence sound like betrayal. Kayla looked at me. I shook my head once. Not to tell her what to say, only to remind her that I wasn't going to say it for her. She turned back toward the phone. I logged into my own account. Mom scoffed. Because Lydia told you to. Because I should have done it months ago. That was the first thing Kayla had said all morning that made me feel something other than anger. Mom tried again. Honey, I was protecting you from making decisions while you were emotional. You made them for me. Someone had to. No. The word was quiet. Mom stopped. Kayla swallowed. No, someone didn't. There was a pause. Then Mom said, "We'll discuss this in person." No. You don't tell me no after everything I've done for you. Kayla's hands tightened. I'll call you later. She ended the call. For a few seconds, she just stood there. Then she sat down hard. I feel sick. I got her a glass of water. She drank half of it and stared at the laptop. What do I do now? The question came automatically. I heard the old pattern in it. So did she. She closed her eyes. Sorry. You don't have to apologize for asking. I need you to tell me what to do. I can tell you what I would do. What's the difference? You decide whether any of it applies. She looked at me. I would save every statement. I would send them to your lawyer. I would ask what needs to be corrected in your financial disclosures. And I would stop making plans based on money you don't actually have access to. Kayla nodded slowly. What about Mom? You need to decide what you want from her. I want my money back. Then ask for that. She's going to say she can't. Then you'll know something else. Kayla rubbed her temples. Do you think she planned all of this? I think she wanted you in my house, because if you weren't paying rent, you wouldn't need the money immediately. I think that gave her time. That's not what I meant. I knew. Do I think she sat down months ago and decided to take your money, fake my housing arrangement, and manipulate everyone step by step? I don't know. Do you think she used my money because she knew she could make you cover the gap somehow? That question was harder. I think Mom believes family resources belong to whoever she decides needs them most. Kayla looked at the statement. So mine belong to her, and mine belong to you. She winced. I didn't take it back. That was the truth. Her phone buzzed. A text from Mom. We need to talk without Lydia there. Kayla read it. Then another. She is making this worse. Then another. Do not send anything to Daniel or your lawyer until I explain. Kayla's face changed. I leaned back. What? She told me not to send the statements to my lawyer. I said nothing. Kayla looked at me. That's bad, right? I think you already know. She stared at the phone another moment. Then she forwarded the statements to her lawyer herself. No speech. No dramatic announcement. She just did it. I watched her attach the files. Type a short message, explaining that the balance in the joint account was much lower than she had believed, and press send. When she finished, her hands were shaking. Done. Okay. That's all you're going to say? What do you want me to say? I don't know. I smiled a little. Then okay is enough. She looked down at the laptop again. After a minute, she asked, Do you think Dad knew? The question had been sitting between us since the HELOC payment appeared. I don't know. That's his house too. Yes. He would notice $96,000 coming off the line. Maybe. You don't believe that. I don't know what he knew. Kayla opened the statement again. The HELOC payment sat there in black and white. $96,000. Not a grocery bill. Not something a spouse could easily miss. Kayla whispered. He knew. I didn't correct her. But I didn't agree either. I had learned enough that week to stop converting suspicion into fact, simply because the conclusion felt obvious. Still, when I left the rental that afternoon, I knew the next question was no longer whether Mom had used Kayla's money. The statements had answered that. The question was how many people had known she was doing it. By the time Kayla's lawyer confirmed receipt of the bank statements, the numbers had stopped feeling abstract. $150,000 had gone into the joint savings account in February. A little over $16,000 remained. $96,000 had gone toward the HELOC on Mom and Dad's house, and roughly $38,000 more had disappeared through credit card payments, property expenses, insurance, and other bills. The exact categories mattered less to me than the pattern. Mom had not dipped into the account once during an emergency and replaced the money a week later. She had been using it repeatedly, over time, while continuing to tell Kayla that the money was safe. Kayla sat at the dining table in her rental, with the statements spread across the screen and a legal pad beside her. For once, it was her legal pad, not mine. She had written 3 numbers at the top. 150,000, 134,000, 16,000. Then underneath them she had written, "Where was this supposed to come back from?" "I keep thinking there has to be another account," she said. "Maybe there is." "You don't believe that." "I don't know. You keep saying that." "Because I don't." Kayla looked at me with the irritated expression she had developed over the previous week whenever I refused to give her certainty she wanted. "You have opinions about everything else. I have plenty of opinions. Facts are different." She leaned back. "Fine, what's your opinion?" I looked at the numbers again. "My opinion is that Mom didn't have $134,000 available to replace what she used. If she did, she wouldn't have needed your money in the first place." Kayla rubbed her forehead. "Then why take it?" "Ask here." I did. "Ask again." Kayla glanced toward the hallway where the children's bedrooms were. They were with Daniel that evening, which was one reason she had asked me to come over. The rental felt different without them, quieter but also less forgiving. There were no interruptions to soften what we were talking about. "I keep replaying Saturday," she said. "The truck. Mia's box. Mom telling the movers where everything would go. So do I. Do you think she planned that because of the money?" I didn't answer immediately. That was the connection I had been circling since the statements appeared. At first, Mom's attempt to move Kayla into my house had seemed like an extreme version of something she had done our whole lives. Redistribute my time, space, or resources according to who she decided needed them more. But once I knew about the missing money, the moving truck looked different. "If you had moved into my house," I said, "what would you have paid in rent?" "Nothing, apparently." "What about a security deposit?" "Nothing." "Moving into a new townhouse?" She stared at me. "Deposit. First month. Maybe last month. Furniture depending on the place. Utility setup. Possibly a longer commute. All things you'd need cash for." "I know. If you lived with me rent-free, how soon would you have needed that $150,000? Her eyes moved back to the statements. "Not soon." "Exactly." Kayla swallowed. I continued carefully. "That doesn't prove Mom took the money with some master plan from the beginning. But once she had used it, putting you in my house would have bought her time." Kayla's face tightened. "You mean she was using your house to cover what she'd done to me?" "I think my house solved 2 problems for her at once." She gave a small, humorless laugh. 3. What was the third? She could tell herself she was saving everybody. That was the first time Kayla had said something about Mom that I would have said myself. I looked down at the numbers and thought about the Saturday morning when Susan had stood in my driveway, telling me that a woman without children had less claim to her own house than a mother of 3. At the time, I had heard entitlement. Now, I heard urgency. Mom had not simply wanted Kayla comfortable. She had needed Kayla not to need her money back. That realization made me angrier than the missing money itself. And it was not even my money. What bothered me was the architecture of it. Susan had used Kayla's money to protect her own house, then tried to use my house to protect herself from Kayla finding out. She had taken from one daughter and tried to cover the gap with another daughter's property, all while calling it family support. Kayla closed the laptop. I want to go over there. Okay. Will you come? Do you want me there because you want a witness, or because you want me to do the talking? She looked annoyed, then thought about it. A witness. I'll come. Mom opened the door before we knocked. I assumed she'd been watching through the front window. Dad's car was in the driveway, which mattered because Kayla had already decided she wanted both of them present. Susan looked at me first. Of course you came. Kayla answered before I could. I asked her to. Mom shifted her attention to her. We can talk without an audience. Lydia isn't an audience. She's the reason you're doing this. Kayla stepped inside. No. The bank statements are the reason I'm doing this. That silenced Mom for half a second. Dad was in the living room with the television muted. Mark Bennett had always been a man who could make himself look uninvolved even when an argument happened 6 feet from him. He stood when we entered and gave me a tired expression. Lydia. Dad. He looked at Kayla. Your mother said there was some confusion about the account. No confusion, Kayla said. I know exactly how much is left. Mom closed the front door harder than necessary. Can we sit down like adults? We did. I chose the armchair farthest from Kayla. It was deliberate. I did not want Mom turning this into another scene where I supposedly controlled my sister. Kayla sat on the couch, facing our parents, phone in her hand. She opened the first statement. I put $150,000 into that account. Mom nodded impatiently. Yes. There's $16,482 left. We've already discussed this. No. You told me you borrowed some. I did. $134,000 isn't some. Susan's mouth tightened. Dad looked at her. That movement caught my attention. Not surprise exactly. More like discomfort. Kayla continued. $96,000 went toward the HELOC. Mom crossed one leg over the other. The line was costing us a fortune in interest. That's not my problem. The words sounded unnatural in Kayla's mouth. Susan noticed too. You've never talked to me like this. I've never opened the account and found $134,000 missing. It isn't missing. Then where is it? I told you. It went toward obligations. Yours. Family obligations. No. Yours. Mom looked at me, as if I had put the sentence in Kayla's mouth. I didn't say anything. Kayla held up her phone. Then there are the other payments. Credit cards, property tax, insurance, what else? Things that needed to be paid. With my money, I was going to replace it. How? Mom's answer came too quickly. We have assets. What assets? Our home, retirement accounts. Then why didn't you use those first? Susan stared at her. Kayla's voice shook, but she kept going. If you had access to enough money to replace mine, why did you need mine? Dad shifted in his chair. Mom said, because timing matters. Explain it. Your father had already been through a difficult year. We were trying not to liquidate long-term assets at the worst possible moment. The HELOC rate had adjusted. We had other balances. I made a temporary decision. With money I gave you to keep safe. I did keep it safe. Kayla laughed in disbelief. You paid your debt with it. I protected equity in this house. That is not the same thing. It will come back to you. From where? Eventually. When we restructure things. When? Susan leaned forward. Why are you acting like I gambled it away? The money went into a house, into bills, into things with value. Value for you. For this family. I could almost hear the mental machinery behind the words. Susan didn't think in terms of individual ownership once family was involved. $1 in Kayla's account, equity in her own house, bedrooms in mine, it all belonged to the same moral pool. And Susan believed she was the person qualified to decide where it should go. Kayla asked, did you ever intend to tell me before I needed it? I intended to replace it before you needed it. That's not what I asked. Mom's eyes flashed. You had housing lined up. The room changed. Kayla stared at her. Mom seemed to realize what she had said a second too late. What housing? Kayla asked. Susan looked toward me. I felt the answer before she gave it. Lydia's house. Kayla's voice went very quiet. So that was part of this. It was part of making sure you and the children were stable. You used my money, then decided I'd live in her house. I did not decide anything. I almost laughed, but Kayla beat me to it. You hired the truck. I was helping you move. To a house Lydia had never agreed to give me. She would have. I spoke for the first time in several minutes. You keep saying that like my consent was a scheduling issue. Mom turned on me. Stay out of this, Kayla said. No, don't. Susan looked at her. Kayla's hands were trembling now, but her voice was clearer than it had been when we arrived. You don't get to tell Lydia to stay out of a conversation about the house you were trying to put me in. Everything I did was because you were falling apart. I was getting divorced. You were barely functioning. I was still functioning. You were calling me every day, because you trained me to call you every day. Dad lifted a hand. Kayla, that's not fair. She turned to him. We're getting to you. His hand dropped. Mom's expression hardened. Your sister has filled your head with this nonsense about me controlling you. Kayla looked at me, then back at Susan. Lydia didn't know enough about my life to fill my head with anything. That's part of the problem between us. The sentence surprised both of us, Kayla continued. She thought I was weak. I thought she was selfish. You kept telling both of us versions of each other that made you necessary. That is absurd, is it? I raised 2 daughters. One of them thinks she's too good to need anyone, and apparently now the other one thinks being helped is abuse. Taking my money isn't help. I borrowed it, without asking, because you would have panicked. I am panicking now. And who's making it worse? Mom snapped, looking at me again. I had enough. Stop using me as an exit. Susan frowned. Excuse me? Every time Kayla asks where her money went, you point at me. Every time she asks why you sent that declaration, you point at me. I'm not the reason there's $16,000 left. Susan's jaw tightened. She said, You have no idea what it's like trying to keep a family afloat. Then explain it with numbers. What? You said you were keeping the family afloat. Fine. How much income do you and Dad have now? How much is left on the mortgage? The HELOC? The cards? What's the plan to return Kayla's $134,000? Dad looked uncomfortable. Mom stared at me. You don't get to audit us. Then stop asking us to trust a plan you won't describe. Susan stood up. I am not going to sit in my own home while my daughter conducts a financial interrogation. Kayla didn't stand. Then give me my money back. Mom looked at her. Today? Kayla asked. Tomorrow? Next week? Give me a date. Susan's anger slipped. Just for a moment. I can't give you one today. Why? Because I need to speak with some people. Who? The bank. Our financial advisor. About what? Options. Kayla stared at her. So you don't have it. I have assets. You don't have my money. Kayla. You don't. Mom turned away. That was when Dad said, Susan, sit down. The room went quiet. Mom looked at him. Not now, Mark. Sit down. There was something different in his voice. Not authority exactly, because my father had surrendered most household authority to Mom years ago. It sounded more like a man realizing silence was about to become more dangerous than speaking. Susan sat. Kayla looked directly at him. Did you know? Dad rubbed his hands over his knees. Know what specifically? I almost groaned. Kayla didn't let him hide behind the wording. Did you know Mom used my money to pay the HELOC? He looked at Susan. That was the answer before the answer. Kayla saw it too. Dad. He sighed. I knew she made a payment. How much? I didn't know the exact figure at first. Did you know it was my money? Another pause. Susan said, Mark, don't. Kayla turned toward her. Let him answer. Dad looked older than 64 in that moment. Not frail. Just tired in a way I had never noticed because Mom usually did the talking for both of them. Yes, he said. I knew some of it came from the account you had with your mother. Kayla's face went blank. Some? I didn't know everything. Did you ask? Dad looked down. That was worse. Kayla said, Did you ask where $96,000 came from? Your mother told me she was moving money temporarily. Did you ask if I agreed? She said you knew she was managing it. That's not what I asked. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. No. I felt something settle in me. For most of my adult life, I had separated my parents into two categories. Mom was the force. Dad was the person standing nearby asking everyone to calm down. Susan decided. Mark avoided. Susan pushed. Mark softened the edges. I had mistaken passivity for innocence. Dad finally looked at Kayla. I thought she had a plan. Kayla laughed once, but there was no humor in it. Everyone keeps having plans for my money except me. That's not fair. Why? Because we were going to replace it. There it is again. How? Dad looked at Susan. She looked furious with him for having spoken at all. I watched that exchange and suddenly understood something about their marriage too. Mom's control had not existed because nobody could stop her. It existed because people around her found it easier to let her decide, especially when her decisions benefited them. Dad had kept his house. The HELOC balance had dropped by $96,000. He had accepted the benefit and chosen not to look too closely at the source. That was a decision. Mom finally spoke. Your father trusted me. Kayla looked at her. I trusted you. Susan's face changed. That was the first statement all evening that seemed to hurt her. But instead of apologizing, she reached for the same justification. And I was trying to protect you. From what? From yourself, from Daniel. From making another bad financial decision while you were emotional. Kayla stared at her. What bad financial decision? Signing a lease you couldn't sustain. Buying too quickly. Letting Daniel force you into an arrangement that isn't good for the children. My lawyer never told me to buy a house. Lawyers don't understand children. Mine literally handles family law. Susan ignored that. You needed stability. Kayla said, I had $168,000 and 3 children. Do you know how quickly that money could disappear? It disappeared pretty quickly with you. Even Dad looked away at that. Susan stood again. This conversation is over. Kayla stood too. No. Mom froze. Kayla's voice shook. But she didn't back down. You don't get to end it because you don't like the questions. I will not be spoken to this way in my own house. Then answer me somewhere else. Susan's eyes narrowed. What happened to you? Kayla stared at her. Then she said something I had been waiting to hear without realizing it. You don't get to offer Lydia's house. Susan's expression went hard. Don't start. No. That was never your house to offer. I was trying to keep your children stable. It wasn't yours. You needed it. It wasn't yours. That repetition mattered. Not because Susan suddenly understood. Because Kayla did. Mom turned to me. Are you proud of yourself? I stood slowly. No. Don't Lee. I'm not proud. I'm wondering why you think Kayla saying something belongs to somebody else means I won. You've been waiting years to turn her against me. Until 2 weeks ago, I barely understood how much she depended on you. Because you never cared enough to pay attention. The accusation hit harder than I expected, because there was a piece of truth inside it. I had kept my distance, partly because being around Mom exhausted me. Partly because watching Kayla let Mom manage her life frustrated me. It had been easier to tell myself they had chosen each other and leave them to it. But recognizing that flaw did not make Susan right about the rest. I could have paid more attention, I said. That doesn't make your decisions mine. Susan looked momentarily thrown by the admission. I continued, and it doesn't make Kayla's money yours. Dad stood too. Can everybody just take a day? I looked at him. That's what you did. He frowned. You took days. Months. You let Mom handle it, because that meant you didn't have to decide whether the money should have been used. His face tightened. You don't know what our finances have been like. You're right. I pointed toward Kayla. But she didn't either, and you used her money anyway. Susan stepped between us verbally before Dad could answer. Enough. Kayla picked up her purse. I want the remaining money moved out of the joint account. Mom's eyes widened. Don't do anything impulsive. It's mine. There could be penalties. It's a savings account. You don't understand how the account was structured. Then I'll ask the bank. Susan looked almost offended by the idea. Kayla continued. I'm sending everything to my lawyer. I'm going to find out what I need to correct. And I want a written plan for how you're paying back the rest. Mom crossed her arms. You are making an enormous mistake. Kayla shook her head. No. I think I already made it. She walked toward the door. I followed. Dad said my name. I turned. He looked at me, then at Susan, then back at me. Lydia, this isn't as black and white as you think. I didn't say it was. Your mother was trying to keep us from getting buried. With Kayla's money, he didn't respond. I opened the door. Mom called after us. If Lydia had just let you stay with her, none of this would have become a crisis. Kayla stopped. Slowly, she turned back. That's the problem. Mom frowned. Kayla said, You still think Lydia saying no caused this? Then she left. I followed her to the driveway. Outside, the evening air felt colder than it had when we arrived. Kayla stood beside her car without opening the door. Did you know? She asked. Know what? That Dad knew. No. I thought maybe you suspected. I suspected. That's different. She nodded. Then she looked back at the house. I don't know what's worse. Mom taking it or Dad knowing? Mom always believes she's right. Dad knows when she's wrong. That was the cleanest description of them I had ever heard. Kayla looked at me. What happens now? I almost answered. I almost told her to move the remaining money immediately. Call her lawyer in the morning. Freeze Susan out of every account. Demand repayment terms. Document everything. And build a budget for the townhouse she still needed. Then I stopped. What do you think happens now? She made a face. I hate when you do that. I know. She looked toward her car. I moved the $16,000 into an account only I control. Okay. I talked to my lawyer. Okay. I find somewhere I can actually afford instead of waiting for Mom to solve it. Okay. And I stop assuming somebody else knows what I'm supposed to do. I nodded. That sounds like a start. She opened her car door, then paused. Do you think Mom can pay it back? I don't know. I don't think she can. Neither did I. But that wasn't the question I was thinking about as I drove home. The HELOC payment had been too large for Dad not to notice eventually. Now I knew he had noticed. And chosen silence. What I still didn't know was how long he'd known, how much of the rest he understood, and whether he had ever once asked Susan what happened if Kayla needed her money before their mysterious plan worked. 2 days later, I got my answer to at least one of those questions. Dad called me alone. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't defend Mom. He just said, I need to explain what I knew. And for the first time since the moving truck appeared, I realized Susan might not be the only parent I had misjudged. Dad called me on a Tuesday evening, 2 days after Kayla and I had left my parents' house with more questions than answers. I was still at my desk when his name appeared on my phone. For most of my life, Dad had avoided calling me in the middle of family conflict because calling meant choosing a position. And choosing a position was exactly what he preferred not to do. That alone was enough to make me answer. I need to explain what I knew, he said. I leaned back in my chair. Okay. There was a pause. I could hear the television in the background, low enough that I assumed Mom wasn't in the room. I knew Susan used money from that account toward the HELOC. How long? A few weeks. Before the moving truck? Another pause. Yes. I closed my eyes. How much did you know she used? I knew about the big payment, not the other charges. The $96,000. Yes. And you knew it was Kayla's money. Dad exhaled slowly. I knew it came from the account your mother was holding with Kayla. That's a complicated way of saying yes. Lydia, I'm trying to explain. Then explain. He was quiet long enough that I almost thought the call had dropped. Finally, he said, When I left the company, our income changed faster than we expected. Dad had been pushed into early retirement after a restructuring the previous year. He had spent 36 years working in operations for the same regional manufacturing company, and until then I had thought of my parents as financially comfortable. Not wealthy, comfortable. They had a nice house, took one good trip most years, replaced cars before they became unreliable, and never talked about money as if there wasn't enough of it. What I had not known was how much of that comfort had been supported by debt. Dad told me the HELOC had been larger than I realized. They had carried credit card balances longer than he was comfortable admitting. When his salary disappeared, they had expected to refinance some of it, but rates and their debt levels made the options worse than Mom had promised him. She told me she had moved some money temporarily to bring the HELOC down, he said. She said it would make everything easier to restructure. Did you ask whose money? She said Kayla knew she was managing it. That's not what I asked. I know. Did you ask whether Kayla agreed to pay your HELOC? No. The word came quietly. I stared at the blank wall across from my desk. Why not? Because Susan told me she was going to replace it. With what? She said once we got the debt down, we'd have options. Did you ask what options? Not in enough detail. I gave a short laugh. Dad didn't like it. I know how that sounds. It sounds like you benefited from $96,000 that belonged to your daughter and decided not to inspect the arrangement too closely. That is not what I decided. It is what you did. His voice sharpened. You think everything is a conscious choice, Lydia. Sometimes people are trying to get through a bad situation. Not asking a question because you don't want the answer is a choice. He didn't respond. I stood and walked toward the window. My backyard was bright with late spring sunlight. The whole scene felt offensively normal. Did you know about the housing declaration? I asked. No. Did you know Mom had sent something to Kayla's lawyer using my address? No. Did you know she had my signature on it? Absolutely not. That answer came fast enough that I believed him. Did you know Mom planned to move Kayla into my house? I knew she thought it was the best solution. Did you know I hadn't agreed? Dad hesitated. Mark. I rarely called him by his first name. He heard the warning. I knew you hadn't given a firm yes. I gave a firm no. Your mother thought you would reconsider. There it is again. What? The family translation system. I say no. Mom says I'll reconsider. You hear that and decide the matter is still open. Dad sounded tired. I wasn't part of the moving truck. No. You just knew enough to understand why she wanted Kayla housed somewhere for free. I didn't connect it that way. Maybe you should have. He went silent again. Then he said something I had heard him say in different forms my entire life. Your mother had a plan. I laughed. But this time it hurt more than it amused me. And that was enough for you? I trusted her. Kayla trusted her too. Lydia. No. You keep saying you trusted Mom like trust erases responsibility. You knew money from Kayla's account had been used to pay debt on your house? You didn't ask Kayla. You didn't tell her. You let Mom tell you it would all work out because the result benefited you. Dad's voice hardened. I did not steal from your sister. I didn't say you did. You're making me sound like I was in on everything. You weren't in on everything. That's what makes this worse in a different way. What is that supposed to mean? It means you didn't need to know everything. You knew enough to ask questions and chose not to. For once, he had nothing to say. We ended the call without resolving anything. Dad said he was sorry Kayla had been blindsided. He did not say he was sorry he had stayed silent. Not yet. Afterward, I sat at my desk, thinking about how easily I had divided my parents into roles. Mom was controlling. Dad was passive. Mom created conflict. Dad endured it. Mom crossed boundaries. Dad tried to keep peace. That version had always made Dad seem safer. I saw now that passivity could do damage just as effectively as aggression when it consistently protected the aggressive person from consequences. Mom had spent years taking charge because people let her. Dad let her because it meant he didn't have to make uncomfortable decisions. Kayla let her because it meant someone else would handle fear before fear became responsibility. Even I had participated in my own way, by keeping enough distance to avoid the system entirely, then judging everyone still inside it. I had spent years thinking I was immune because I was independent. What I hadn't understood was that distance could become its own kind of blindness. That didn't make me responsible for what Mom had done. It did make me rethink the way I had looked at Kayla. The next evening, Kayla asked if I would come with her to talk to our parents again. This time, she didn't ask me to speak for her. She said she wanted me there because Mom had started telling her she was being manipulated, and Kayla wanted one conversation where nobody could later rewrite what had been said. I can do that, I told her. When we arrived, Dad opened the door. Mom was already sitting in the living room. Her posture told me the conversation had been discussed before we got there. She had a folder beside her, which would have been funny if the situation hadn't been so ugly. Kayla sat across from her. I took the same armchair I had used before. Mom looked at me. I assume Mark told you everything he could think of. Dad's jaw tightened. He told me what he knew, I said, which was very little. Enough. Mom turned to Kayla. This is exactly why I wanted to speak with you alone. Kayla didn't react. Mom leaned forward. You've let Lydia turn this into something it isn't. Kayla asked. What is it then? A family financial problem that got messy during the worst year we've had in decades. My money was part of that problem without me knowing. I was trying to protect you. From what? Mom glanced at me. From making decisions the way Lydia does. I raised an eyebrow. Kayla frowned. What does that mean? It means your sister thinks every problem can be solved with a boundary, a contract, and a cold answer. There it was. Mom had found the one criticism of me that contained enough truth to be useful. Lydia has always looked at you like you're weak, she told Kayla. I felt the hit before Kayla looked at me. Mom continued. She thinks because she bought a house and built a career and never needed anyone, everyone should live exactly like she does. You know that. You've known it your whole life. Kayla said nothing. Mom saw the opening and kept going. When you were falling apart after the separation, who was there every day? Who helped with the children? Who went through the housing listings? Who sat with you while you cried? Lydia showed up after she had something to investigate. The unfairness of it made me want to interrupt. I didn't, because there was truth mixed into it. I had not been there every day. I had kept my distance from Kayla's divorce because every conversation seemed to end with Mom explaining what Kayla needed. I had told myself that Kayla had chosen that arrangement. Sometimes I had looked at her dependency with contempt instead of curiosity. Mom looked at me. Tell her I'm wrong. I could have. Instead, I said, you're not wrong about all of it. Mom's expression shifted. Kayla looked at me too. I did think you were weak, I said to her. Sometimes I still think you hand over decisions too easily. And what I said at the cafe about you needing to learn to live without Mom was crueler than it needed to be. Mom leaned back slightly, almost satisfied. I continued before she could use it. But me being unfair about Kayla doesn't change what you did. The satisfaction disappeared. I can be wrong about my sister, and you can still be wrong about her money. Mom's mouth tightened. I can admit I kept too much distance, I said. That doesn't make the housing declaration real. It doesn't put $134,000 back in Kayla's account. It doesn't make my house yours to promise. Susan looked at Kayla. Do you see what she does? She gives you 1 inch of emotion and then turns everything back into evidence. Kayla stared at her. Then she asked, if my money was safe, why did you need Lydia's house? Mom blinked. I stayed quiet. Kayla asked again. You kept telling me everything was fine. You told me not to worry about the account. If the money was safe, why were you so desperate to get me into Lydia's house? You needed stable housing. That's not what I asked. Susan sighed. Because it solved multiple problems. What problems? It kept the children near school. What else? It kept you from wasting money on another temporary rental. What else? Mom glanced toward Dad. Kayla noticed. What else? Susan's voice hardened. It gave us time. There it was. Kayla's face changed. Time for what? To put everything back where it belonged. How? We were looking at restructuring. With what income? Your father has retirement assets. Then why didn't you use them before my money? Because that would have been financially irresponsible. Kayla laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Using my money was responsible? It was temporary. Why didn't you give it back when I asked? Mom's patience cracked. Because I couldn't give you $134,000 on 24 hours' notice. You'd had it for months. I had used it to keep this family from sinking. Your family, or your house, those are not separate things. That sentence explained more about Mom than any accusation could have. Kayla looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "They are separate things." Susan stared. "My children are my family," Kayla continued. "Lydia is my family. Dad is my family. You are my family. Your house is an asset. That house has been your family home for years. It still wasn't mine to fund without knowing." Susan's voice rose. "And Lydia's house has 6 empty bedrooms." Kayla shook her head. "Not mine. You needed them. Still not mine. The children. Still not mine." Mom stopped. I had heard Kayla say a version of that during our last confrontation, but this was different. She wasn't repeating something I had taught her. She was applying the same rule to herself. Susan looked at me like I had poisoned her. "You've turned her against me," Kayla answered. "No." Mom ignored her. "You have always hated how close we were. Mom, she resented you because I helped you. Mom, and now she's using one mistake to prove she's always been right. Mom." Susan finally looked at her. Kayla's voice was quiet. "Lydia didn't make me open my bank account." Susan said nothing. "She didn't take my money. Still nothing. She didn't send a paper with Lydia's signature to my lawyer. I was trying to help. I know." Those 3 words landed differently than an accusation would have. Kayla continued. "That's the part I finally understand. You were always trying to help." Susan's expression softened slightly. Then Kayla said, "And you still weren't allowed to do it." Mom's face closed again. "I don't know who has been coaching you to talk like this." Kayla gave a tired laugh. "That is exactly the problem." Dad shifted on the couch. Susan turned to him. "Are you going to sit there?" Dad looked at her. "What do you want me to say? That this is insane?" He didn't. Mom stared at him. That silence was another small fracture. Kayla took a breath. "There is something else I need to say." I looked at her. She didn't look at me immediately. "When I brought the truck to your house, I knew you hadn't agreed. I had known that already. But hearing her choose to say it in front of Mom mattered." Susan jumped in. "Because I told you she would." Kayla lifted her hand. "No." Susan stopped. Kayla turned toward me. "I knew you hadn't said yes. Mom told me you would once we were there. I wanted to believe her because I wanted the house." I felt my chest tighten, Kayla continued. "I packed the kids. I let Mia believe she had a room. I let Caleb and Lily think we were moving. I knew if they were standing there with boxes, you'd have a harder time saying no," Susan said. "You were desperate." Kayla shook her head. "That doesn't erase it." I looked at my sister. There were a dozen things I could have said. I could have told her I appreciated the honesty. I could have softened it because she looked close to tears. I didn't. "Mom built the plan," I said. "You still chose to stand inside it." Kayla nodded. "I know. You used your children to pressure me." "I know. That wasn't Mom's decision alone." "I know." Susan stood. "Why are you letting her talk to you like this?" Kayla looked at her. "Because she's right." Mom stared at her. "I was wrong too," Kayla said. "You lying to me about the money doesn't erase what I did to Lydia." Susan looked genuinely confused. That was when I understood how much her entire system depended on blame moving cleanly from one person to another. If Mom was guilty, Kayla had to be innocent. If Lydia was angry, Lydia had to be cruel. If Kayla needed help, someone else had to owe it. Kayla, accepting both truths, at once broke the structure. She had been manipulated. She had also made a bad choice. Both could be true. Mom couldn't use one to erase the other anymore. Kayla reached into her purse and took out a small notebook. "I'm changing how I'm handling things." Susan laughed nervously. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm talking to my lawyer directly. You already do. No. I mean without sending everything through you first. Susan's expression hardened. I'm moving the remaining money into an account only I control. That's reckless. I'm working with a financial counselor my lawyer recommended. Why would you pay a stranger to tell you things I can tell you for free? Kayla didn't answer that. I'm finding a rental I can afford based on money I actually have. What about the children? They will have a home. Where? I haven't signed anything yet. Susan's face changed again. You didn't ask me. No. What school district? I'll work that out with Daniel. Susan stared at her. Daniel? Their father. You know how manipulative he can be. Then I'll deal with that with my lawyer. Mom sat down slowly. She looked less angry than shocked. For years, she had been the intersection through which every road in Kayla's life passed. Kayla was quietly building detours. Susan said, "After everything I've done for you, this is what I get." Kayla closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she looked tired but steady. "I'm not punishing you. It feels like punishment. I'm making my own decisions." Same thing, apparently. Kayla stood. Dad said, "Where are you going?" "Home." Mom's face twisted. "That rental isn't home." Kayla looked at her. "It's where my children and I live right now. That makes it home enough." She picked up her purse. I stood too. Mom pointed at me. "You see? This is what you wanted." I looked at Kayla, then back at Susan. "No, don't leave. I wanted you out of my house. I wanted the truth about the document." "That's what I wanted? You wanted her to stop needing me. I didn't know how much she needed you until this happened. Then what do you call this?" I looked at Kayla. Her making decisions. Susan laughed bitterly. "And you think that makes you the good sister?" "No. I meant it. I wasn't leaving that room feeling heroic. I had spent years judging Kayla from a comfortable distance. I had been right about some things and cruel about others. What separated me from Mom was not that I had never made mistakes. It was that I wasn't going to use my mistakes as permission to control someone else. Kayla and I walked out together. At the driveway, she stopped beside her car. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," she said. "Good." She almost smiled. I deserved that. Probably. She looked toward the house. "Do you think she's ever going to understand?" "No. You didn't even think about it. I don't think understanding is the requirement." "What is?" "Behavior." Kayla nodded slowly. "I don't know if I can do this without her." I knew what she meant. Not the divorce. Not the money. Her life. "I don't know either." She looked at me. That answer surprised her. I could have told her she would be fine. I could have listed her strengths. I could have given her a plan. Instead, I said, "But I think you should find out." She got into her car. I went home. For the first time since the moving truck appeared, I believed the fight might be changing shape. It wasn't me against Mom anymore. It wasn't even Kayla against Mom. The real conflict was becoming whether each of us would keep accepting the roles Susan had assigned us. That night, just after 9, my phone rang. "Mom." I considered letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered. Her voice was different. No anger. No accusation. Almost controlled. "Lydia," she said, "I need to talk to you about a loan." I didn't say anything. She continued. "If we can put Kayla's money back quickly, we can stop this from getting worse." And in that moment, I understood what she was asking. Mom had tried to use my house to cover the holes she had made in Kayla's finances. Now that the house was off the table, she wanted to use my money instead. Mom did not ask for the money, like someone asking a daughter for help. She presented it like a transaction that happened to require my participation. By the time she finished speaking, she had turned $134,000 into a bridge loan, a repayment schedule, and a family obligation that apparently existed because I had the best credit score in the room. "We're not asking you to give us anything," she said. "We would pay you back." I was standing in my kitchen with one hand on the counter, looking out at the dark backyard. With what? "We have equity." Then use it. It isn't that simple. That phrase again. Mom continued as if I hadn't interrupted. "Your father and I have assets. We just need time to restructure things without making a series of terrible decisions under pressure. Like using Kayla's money without asking? Lydia, you called me. I called because you keep saying you want Kayla protected. This protects her. We put the money back into her account. She can tell her lawyer everything is intact. She can move forward with housing, and this stops becoming a family disaster. I listened carefully to the wording, not because I believed the loan would somehow erase what had already happened. Bank statements would still show the transfers. The housing declaration would still exist. Kayla would still need to correct anything in her financial disclosures that had been based on a balance she didn't actually have. But if I replaced the money quickly, Mom could point to a restored account and say the problem had been temporary. She could keep the house. Dad could keep pretending he had only been passively caught in her decisions. And once again, I would be the person who absorbed the cost so everyone else could move on faster. How much are you asking for? I said. Mom hesitated, probably surprised I hadn't refused immediately. 134. All of it. That is what Kayla is missing. Interest? We would discuss that. Term? 5 years. I almost laughed. At what monthly payment? We haven't finalized the numbers. So you have a 5-year repayment plan without a payment. That is why I said we need to discuss it. What income are you using to repay me? Your father has retirement income. I still work. Part-time. I can increase my hours. Can you? The silence told me she had not checked. I opened my laptop. Mom heard the movement. What are you doing? Looking at what you're asking. You don't need to turn this into one of your spreadsheets. I absolutely do. I wasn't going to decide based on anger, guilt, or the strange satisfaction of being asked for something Mom had spent years pretending I owed automatically. I wanted to know whether the proposal was merely unfair or also financially stupid. I knew enough about my own finances to understand that I could probably make the money appear if I wanted to, not without consequences. I did not have $134,000 sitting in a checking account waiting for a family emergency. I would have had to move investments, pull from reserves I kept for my business, or use credit secured against assets I had spent years protecting. I could do it. That was different from saying I should. You have the money, Mom said, as if hearing my silence. I have access to money. Same difference. No, it isn't. You live alone in a $1.4 million house. There it is. What? The part where everything I own becomes evidence that I should fix something I didn't cause. Mom exhaled sharply. This isn't about you. It becomes about me when you ask me for $134,000. I am trying to save your sister from having her finances ripped apart in a divorce. They already have to be accurate. You know what I mean. I do. You want the balance restored before anyone has to look too hard at why it wasn't there. That is not what I said. It's what the timing says. Her voice hardened. You are determined to make me sound criminal. I'm determined not to pretend repayment would erase the last 3 months. We borrowed money from family. Without the family member agreeing, I said I would put it back. And now you're asking someone else to put it back for you. Mom went quiet. I could hear a cabinet close on her end. Then she changed tactics. If you don't care what happens to me, fine. Think about the children. I closed my eyes. They need a mother who isn't fighting 3 financial fires while trying to get divorced. Kayla needs stable housing. She needs to focus on them, not on chasing money through this family. Then maybe you shouldn't have spent hers. You love saying that. I keep saying it because you keep talking like the consequence appeared by itself. You think you're so much smarter than everyone else. No. I think numbers remain numbers when feelings get inconvenient. That is exactly what I mean. You have no idea what it means to make a decision because people depend on you. I almost answered the way I would have a week earlier. I almost defended my work, my responsibilities, all the times the children had depended on me. Then I realized I didn't need to prove anything. I'll look at the proposal, I said. Mom stopped. You will? I said I'll look at it. Her tone softened immediately. Thank you. I hated how quickly she assumed examination meant surrender. Don't thank me yet. After we hung up, I stayed at the kitchen island for nearly an hour. I did what Mom disliked most. I made the problem concrete. If I lent them $134,000, what would actually change? Kayla's account balance could be restored. She would have more housing flexibility. She could stop worrying that her mother had consumed most of the money from the house sale. The kids might get a faster transition into a longer-term rental. Mom and Dad might avoid selling their home. Those were real benefits. Then I wrote what would not change. The housing declaration would still have been sent with my signature attached to it. Mom would still have used Kayla's money without asking. Dad would still have known enough to question the HELOC payment and chosen not to. Kayla would still have arrived at my house with a truck while knowing I had not agreed. And I would become the new creditor holding the bag for every decision they had made. I thought about Mia standing in my driveway with a box marked "New Room." That was the part that made the loan tempting. Not Mom. Not Dad. The children. If I wanted, I could make Kayla's immediate financial situation easier before breakfast. That was exactly how people like me got trapped into solving things. Not because we were weak. Because we were capable. I understood something about myself that night that I had not wanted to admit before. My problem had never been that I sacrificed everything for my family. I didn't. I had boundaries. I had built a life far enough from Mom's control that she couldn't normally rearrange it. My weakness was subtler. When a problem landed in front of me and I knew I could solve it, I had trouble accepting that choosing not to solve it might be the wiser decision. The next morning, I called Kayla. "I need to tell you something before Mom does." She sounded wary. "What?" She asked me to lend them $134,000. Kayla didn't respond. "Kayla." "She did what?" "She wants to restore your account and repay me over 5 years. No. I hadn't expected the answer that fast. No what? No, don't do that. I sat straighter. Okay, you're not listening. I mean, don't. I heard you. She called me last night and told me she had found a way to fix it. She didn't say the way was you. That sounds like Mom. Kayla cursed under her breath. I said, I'm looking at the numbers before I decide anything. Why? Because I don't make a decision on $134,000 without looking at it. You don't owe me that money. I know. Then why would you even consider it? That question surprised me. For you. No. And the kids? No. Kayla. No. You don't get to make me the reason. I went quiet. She took a breath. I already did that to you once. I used the kids because I wanted your house. I'm not letting Mom use them to get your money too. There was no defensiveness in her voice this time, just embarrassment and anger. I have $18,000 I kept outside the account, she said. My lawyer told me to stop making decisions based on what Mom says is available and build a budget around what I can actually use. I found 2 townhouses I can afford if I stop trying to stay in the exact neighborhood I wanted. What about school? Daniel and I are working it out. That sentence alone showed how much had changed. A month earlier, Kayla would have said Mom was handling it. Does that mean the kids might have a longer drive? I asked. Maybe. Or we adjust some school night exchanges. My lawyer said people do that all the time. How do you feel about it? I hate it. I smiled despite myself. That's probably normal. I wanted them to stay in exactly the same routine. I know. But wanting that doesn't mean I get your house. No. And it doesn't mean you take on Mom and Dad's debt. No. She hesitated. Then she said, if you loan them the money, she'll never believe she was wrong. I thought about that. This isn't about teaching Mom a lesson. Maybe not, but she'd learn something anyway. What? That if she goes far enough, somebody competent will eventually clean it up. That sounded uncomfortably familiar. I looked at the page of notes in front of me. You've been thinking about this. I've been thinking about a lot of things. That's new. Don't ruin the moment. I laughed. So did she, briefly. Then Kayla became serious again. My lawyer says I need to update the financial disclosure to show what's actually in the joint account, and that I'm claiming the rest should be returned to me. That sounds reasonable. She also said putting the money back now doesn't make the earlier transfers disappear. Exactly. Mom keeps talking like if the balance is restored, everybody can stop looking. I noticed. Are you going to say no? I haven't decided. Kayla groaned. You're impossible. I'm cautious. You're overthinking. Probably. For the first time in years, Kayla was the one telling me I didn't have to fix something. That mattered more than I let her hear. Eric called later that afternoon after I sent him a brief summary of Mom's proposal. He was careful not to advise me as a financial planner, but his legal point was simple. If you lend them money, document it like a real loan. But understand the loan does not change the historical facts you've already preserved. I know. And if your concern is the housing declaration, don't let anyone tie your decision on the loan to whether you continue preserving or pursuing that issue. I won't. I mean it. Family settlements get messy when everyone trades silence for money. I'm not trading anything. Good. After we hung up, I understood what had been bothering me about Mom's proposal. She hadn't explicitly asked me to withdraw anything, delete anything, or tell anyone the housing declaration was a misunderstanding. She didn't have to. She wanted everything financially repaired fast enough that the family could stop asking questions. It was a cover-up in the ordinary sense, not the dramatic criminal movie version. Restore the money. Keep the house. Tell everyone the crisis was temporary. Move on before anyone had to sit with what had actually happened. I called Mom that evening. I've looked at it. She sounded almost cheerful. Good. I'm not lending you the money. The warmth disappeared. Lydia, the numbers don't work. What numbers? Your repayment plan doesn't exist. Dad's retirement income isn't enough to support what you're proposing. Your part-time income doesn't cover the gap. You already have mortgage debt, an $84,000 HELOC balance, and more than $50,000 in unsecured debt. Who told you all that? Dad gave Kayla enough information to understand the broad picture. You also included some of it in the proposal you sent. You have no right to analyze our finances. You asked me to finance them. Mom was silent. I continued. Even if you could pay me back eventually, I'd be moving the risk from you to me so you could keep the house. We are your parents. Yes. Does that mean nothing? It means you're my parents. It does not mean I become your bank. This is not about the house. It is partly about the house. Kayla's money paid down your HELOC. Now you're asking me to restore Kayla's money so you don't have to touch the equity that payment helped protect. Do you hear how cold you sound? Do you hear how circular this is? Mom raised her voice. We are trying to avoid destroying the one major asset your father and I have left. Then you shouldn't have protected it with Kayla's money. We were going to repay her. With what? You keep asking the same question. Because you still don't have an answer. She went silent. I lowered my voice. I'm not financing the cover-up. Mom made a sharp sound. Cover-up? Stop using words like that. I'm not saying repayment would erase evidence. It wouldn't. I'm saying you want me to put money into the hole so everyone can act like the hole never mattered. That is disgusting. No. What's disgusting is making me responsible for how this looks. I am trying to fix a mistake. Then fix it with your resources. She laughed bitterly. There it is. Your resources, my resources, Kayla's resources. Everything has a label with you. Yes, ownership tends to work that way. And family means nothing. Family means you ask. Mom hung up on me. I didn't call back. 2 days later, Kayla told me Mom and Dad had spoken to their bank. They were exploring refinance and cash-out options. At first, Susan told Kayla that everything would be resolved within days. Then days became we're reviewing alternatives. Dad finally admitted their borrowing capacity was much lower than Mom had implied. Mark's retirement income was a fraction of his former salary. Mom's bookkeeping work was part-time. Their revolving debt utilization was high. The HELOC was still substantial even after the $96,000 payment. Another large loan on favorable terms was not simply waiting for them because they owned a house with equity. They had equity. That was different from having cash. Kayla called me after speaking with Dad. He said the bank won't give them enough. I suspected that. He said they can pull from retirement. They can probably pull something. He doesn't want to. That's their decision. He said there would be taxes and they would be putting themselves in a bad position. Also probably true. So what happens? I looked down at my notes. I don't know. She sighed. You do know. I know what options exist. I don't know what they'll choose. They can sell the house. Yes, the words sat there. The irony was almost too obvious. Mom had taken Kayla's money to protect her own house, then tried to take my house to avoid returning the money, then tried to borrow from me when that failed. If the refinance options were as bad as Dad said, the cleanest source of enough cash was the equity in the very house they had been trying to preserve. Kayla sounded shaken. I don't want them homeless. They won't be homeless. You don't know that. They have equity. Selling one house and moving somewhere cheaper is not homelessness. She was quiet. I recognized the old family language trying to return. House loss became homelessness. A smaller home became ruin. Consequences became cruelty. I said, "You can feel bad for them without fixing it." Kayla laughed softly. "Did you practice that in a mirror?" "No." "You should. It sounded very therapist. I'll add it to my resume." She was quiet again. Then she said, "I mean it, Lydia. Don't give them the money because of me." "I won't." That was the first time I said it, without qualification. The decision felt surprisingly calm once it was made. I wasn't choosing to make Mom and Dad lose anything. I was choosing not to transfer the consequence to myself. There was a difference. The following week, Mom sent me one final email with a revised proposal. Lower interest, longer repayment. A paragraph about how much the children had already suffered. I read it once, then I replied with 4 sentences. "I am not making the loan. My decision is final. Please do not send additional financing proposals. Any communication regarding the housing declaration should continue through the appropriate channels." I hit send and went back to work. That afternoon, Kayla called to tell me she had submitted an application for a townhouse. It was smaller than she wanted, farther from the children's school than my house, and very definitely not free. "Congratulations," I said. "I haven't gotten it yet." "You applied. That's a low bar." "Maybe. Still yours." She went quiet. "Yeah," she said. "It is." A few hours later, Mom called. I almost let it go unanswered, but I picked up because I knew from the email she had already run out of proposals. Her voice was flat. "The refinance isn't going to work." "I'm sorry." "No, you're not." "I am sorry you're in this position." "I'm not sorry I said no." She breathed hard into the phone. "Your father says we may have to list the house." I didn't answer. Mom waited for me to fill the silence. I didn't. Then she said, "You'd really watch your parents lose their home because you refused to help?" I looked around the kitchen she had tried to give to someone else without asking me. And for the first time, the question didn't make me feel guilty. It made me wonder whether Susan had finally run out of other people's property to volunteer. By the end of May, the argument had stopped being theoretical. Mom and Dad listed their house. Kayla was the one who told me. She called on a Thursday afternoon while I was finishing a client meeting and said, "It's online." I knew exactly what she meant. I waited until I got home before I looked. The listing photos were strange to see because I knew every room without needing captions. The living room where Dad watched football. The kitchen where Mom had spent years telling both of us what everyone else needed. The hallway where our school pictures had once hung in matching frames. Now the walls were almost bare, the counters cleared, the furniture arranged to make the rooms look larger. The asking price was just under $800,000. I stared at the listing longer than I expected. There was satisfaction in knowing Mom could no longer use my house as a solution to the problem she had created. But there was no pleasure in seeing my childhood home reduced to square footage, bathrooms, and recent upgrades. I had learned by then that consequences could be deserved and still hurt to watch. The numbers were finally simple enough that even Mom could no longer talk around them. Their house had substantial equity, but not unlimited equity. They still owed a little over $300,000 on the first mortgage. The HELOC balance remained around $84,000 even after the $96,000 payment Susan had made with Kayla's money. They also had more than $50,000 in unsecured debt. Mark's retirement income was nowhere near his old salary, and Mom's bookkeeping work was not enough to support another large loan. Their bank had looked at refinance options, but the combination of debt, reduced income, and their current credit profile meant they could not borrow enough on terms that made sense. Selling did something borrowing couldn't. It turned the equity in the house into cash. Enough cash to repay what was still owed to Kayla, clear much of the debt they had been carrying, and leave Mom and Dad with enough to rent or buy something smaller without pretending their old financial life was still sustainable. No judge ordered them to sell. No sheriff showed up. I did not force a sale. That distinction mattered to me because Mom would spend the next 2 months telling anyone who would listen that I had made them lose their house. What actually happened was less dramatic and more damning. They had finally run out of other people's resources. Kayla moved into a townhouse the first week of June. It had 3 bedrooms instead of 6, a small fenced patio, and a kitchen she described as offensively beige. It was farther from the kids' school than she wanted, but not far enough to make their schedule impossible. She and Daniel adjusted 2 weekday exchanges, so the children were not spending unnecessary time in the car, and her lawyer helped make sure the proposed parenting plan reflected where she actually lived, instead of where Mom had once decided she should live. The first time Kayla called me from the townhouse, I heard Caleb yelling in the background that Mia had taken his charger. "Sounds stable," I said. "Shut up." I laughed. "How are the kids?" "Fine. Lily likes the stairs. Mia hates the smaller bedroom." "That sounds 12. She asked if she could paint one wall blue. Are you going to let her?" I told her yes. I smiled at that, because a few months earlier, Kayla would probably have called Mom and asked what color Mia should be allowed to choose. "Then it sounds like you're settling in." "Don't get sentimental." "I wasn't. You were close." Kayla's voice changed after that. My lawyer sent the updated financial disclosure. "Okay. It shows what's actually left in the joint account and the repayment issue with Mom." "How did that go?" "Uncomfortably. That isn't the same thing as badly." "I know." Daniel had learned about the missing money through the proper legal process, not because I sent him a dramatic packet designed to destroy Kayla. He had questions, which was reasonable. Kayla's earlier statements about her available funds had been based on the belief that most of the sale proceeds were still intact. Once she learned they were not, her lawyer corrected the information. It did not end the divorce. It did not hand Daniel the children. It did not produce a cinematic courtroom speech. It made Kayla look careless and dependent on her mother, which she admitted she had been. Her attorney dealt with it. Daniel's attorney dealt with it. The parenting discussions continued. That was all. Mom hated that normality more than she would have hated a public scandal. She wanted every consequence to have a villain. Instead, Kayla simply stopped routing her life through her. Susan was removed from access to Kayla's accounts. Kayla started handling school emails herself. She spoke directly with Daniel about routine schedule changes instead of asking Mom to draft messages for her. She and Daniel agreed that neither grandparent would promise the children housing, trips, school changes, or major purchases without checking with a parent first. Mom called that humiliating. Kayla called it parenting. A week after my parents accepted an offer on their house, Dad called me. He sounded tired. "The buyers want a fast closing." "Is that a problem?" "Not exactly." There was a pause. "We're going to need storage for a while." I already knew where this was headed. Dad continued. "The place your mother found isn't available until after closing." "Okay. We were wondering if you could help cover the storage and temporary rental." I leaned back in my chair. "How much?" "A few thousand, maybe more depending on how long." It was almost funny. We had gone from $134,000 to a few thousand, as if shrinking the number should automatically change the answer. "Dad, no." He exhaled. "It's not a loan against your house." "I know. It's not anything like what Susan asked." "I know. Then why are you saying no?" "Because you have money coming out of the sale." "Not until closing. Then use a credit card for the storage and pay it off after closing." "We're trying to stop using credit." "Good. Lydia." I waited. He said, "I'm asking for help, not a bailout." I understood why he was making the distinction. Part of me even agreed with him. A few $1,000s for storage would not have endangered me. I could have paid it without changing my life. That was exactly why I needed to be careful. The old instinct returned immediately. I could fix this. It would cost me almost nothing. Why make the situation harder when I could make it easier? Then I remembered what I had finally learned about myself. Ability did not create obligation. You have an asset closing in a few weeks, I said. You can solve this. Dad went quiet. I thought family helped each other. We do. Apparently not. I helped Kayla read documents when she asked. I helped her understand what questions she needed to ask. I did not pay her rent. I did not replace her money. Helping doesn't always mean paying. You know what I mean. I do, he sighed. I didn't think you'd become this hard. That hurt more coming from him than it had from Mom. I'm not trying to be hard. What are you trying to be? Consistent. He didn't like that answer. Neither had Mom, but consistency was exactly what had been missing from our family. Rules changed depending on who needed something. Ownership changed depending on who Mom thought deserved it. Responsibility disappeared whenever the consequences became painful enough. I was done participating in that. Dad paid for the storage himself. Nothing collapsed. That was another lesson our family should have learned years earlier. Sometimes we can't do this without Lydia had really meant we don't want to do this if Lydia could make it easier. Mom's relationship with Kayla deteriorated faster than her relationship with me. I think that surprised Susan. She had always expected conflict with me. Resistance fit the version of me she understood. Kayla was different. Kayla had been the daughter who called, asked, accepted, followed, apologized, and came back. When Kayla stopped doing those things automatically, Mom treated independence like hostility. She called 3 times one morning because Kayla had changed the emergency contact information at Mia's school without consulting her. Kayla called me afterward. She says I'm cutting her out of the kids' lives. Are you? No. Then what did you do? I put Daniel first because he's their father. You're the secondary emergency contact. I paused. May? Don't make it weird. I'm not. Mom was listed before Daniel on one of the old forms. That actually shocked me. How? Because I filled it out during a period when Daniel was traveling a lot, and then I never updated it. And now you did. Yes. Seems reasonable. Mom says it's punishment. Is it? No. Daniel and I agreed on it. There was the phrase I kept hearing more often. Daniel and I agreed. Not Mom decided. Not Mom said. Not Mom handled it. The marriage might still end. But Kayla was finally learning that co-parenting required communication with the other parent, not a maternal interpreter standing between them. Mom's access to the children did not disappear. She still saw them occasionally. But Kayla and Daniel put limits around it. Susan could visit. She could attend birthdays when invited. She could take the kids for an afternoon when one of their parents approved it. She could not promise them bedrooms that did not belong to her. That boundary wounded her more deeply than any bank statement. She called me one Sunday evening and said, Kayla won't even let me take Mia shopping without checking with Daniel first. He's her father. I have been taking care of that child since the day she was born. That doesn't make you her parent. You sound just like him. I've barely spoken to Daniel. Then you sound like Kayla's lawyer. I haven't spoken to her either. Mom made an irritated sound. What do you want from me? I want my family back. I knew what she meant. She wanted the old traffic pattern restored. Kayla called Susan. Susan made a decision. Dad accepted it. I stayed far enough away to complain but not interfere. Then everyone called that family harmony. I don't think the family went anywhere, I said. Easy for you to say. You're still their mother. You're still the kids' grandmother. With permission, that word came out like an insult. I let a few seconds pass. Yes. She went quiet. With permission. She hung up not long after that. By July, the sale of my parents' house was moving toward closing. Kayla had received a written outline of how the repayment would work once the proceeds cleared. Her lawyer reviewed it. There was no instant wire the moment a buyer signed an offer. There were closing costs, loan payoffs, escrow, and paperwork. But for the first time since she discovered the account balance, Kayla could point to a real source of repayment rather than one of Mom's plans. Dad became more withdrawn. Mom became more angry. One Friday night, 3 days before they were scheduled to move out. Susan called me. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. "What?" I asked. She was silent for a moment. "I wanted to hear your voice." I knew immediately that wasn't the whole reason. "Okay, the movers are coming Monday." I heard. 31 years in this house. I looked around my own kitchen. "I'm sorry. Are you?" "Yes." "You don't act like it." "I can be sorry you're losing a home you loved, and still believe selling it is the right consequence of what happened." Mom laughed bitterly. "Consequence. What would you call it?" "Punishment." "By whom?" She didn't answer. "Mom, who is punishing you?" "You." "No. If you wrote one check, we wouldn't be moving." "There it is." "What?" "The part where my money becomes the thing standing between you and a consequence." She raised her voice. "You could stop this. I could also pay everybody's mortgage for a month." "That doesn't make their mortgages mine." "We're not everybody." "I know. We are your parents." "I know." "You would really watch your parents lose their home?" The question was almost identical to the one she had asked weeks earlier. But by then I had heard it enough to understand what was inside it. Not grief. Assignment. If I had the ability to prevent something painful and refused, Mom wanted the pain to belong to me. I wasn't accepting it. "You didn't lose the house because I said no." "Of course we did." "No. You used money that wasn't yours and expected my house to cover the gap. When that failed, you expected my money to cover it." I said no to both. We were trying to survive. You were trying to preserve this specific house. That house is our life. It's part of your life. You wouldn't understand. Maybe not. That answer took some of the energy out of her. I continued. "But I understand this. Kayla's money went into your debt. Selling your house releases the equity to pay her back. That's not me punishing you. That's your asset, solving your obligation." Mom went silent. I could hear her breathing. Finally, she said, "You sound proud of yourself." "I'm not." "You should be. You won." The word bothered me. I didn't want your house. You wanted me to pay. I wanted Kayla to get her money back. And you wanted me to suffer. I thought about that before answering. There had been moments when I had wanted her embarrassed. Moments when I wanted her to feel exactly what I had felt on the driveway. I wasn't proud of those moments, but pretending they had never existed would have been dishonest. "I wanted you to stop making other people absorb your decisions." "Same thing." "No," Mom whispered. "It feels the same." That was probably the most honest thing she had said to me since April. I softened my voice without changing my answer. "I'm sorry it hurts." Then I added, "I'm still not stopping it." She hung up. 3 days later, the buyers closed. I didn't attend. I didn't ask for pictures. I didn't call Dad to see how the movers were doing. The next afternoon, I had a meeting in Bellevue and took a route home that carried me within a few blocks of my parents' neighborhood. I could have turned earlier. I didn't. I drove past the house. A moving truck sat in the driveway. For one strange second, the sight pulled me straight back to April 18th. Different house. Same white truck body. Same metal ramp. Same cardboard boxes appearing one by one. Mom was standing near the garage, directing 2 movers. Dad carried a lamp toward his car. Neither of them saw me. I slowed because of traffic. Not because I wanted to watch. A box sat near the curb with black marker across the top. Kitchen. Nothing poetic. Nothing cinematic. Just people moving because their financial circumstances had changed. I felt sad. I also felt relieved. Those emotions did not cancel each other out. Then traffic moved, and I moved with it. I did not stop the car. I did not take a picture. I did not text Kayla. I simply drove home. By the following week, Kayla had received the repayment from the house proceeds through the arrangement her lawyer had reviewed. It did not undo what had happened. It did not restore trust. But the money was no longer a promise Susan controlled. For the first time, Kayla could make decisions from facts instead of assurances. And for the first time, Susan had been forced to use her own asset to solve a problem she had created instead of volunteering someone else's. I thought that was the end of the part of the story that involved my house. Then, one Friday evening in early August, My phone buzzed while I was watering the plants on my back patio. It was Kayla. Her message was short. "Can I come by this weekend? Just me and the kids, if you're okay with that." I read it twice. Not "we're coming over." Not "Mom said." Not "the kids need." "Can I?" I looked through the glass doors into the house that had started all of this. Then I typed back. "Sunday afternoon works." Kayla arrived on Sunday at 2:15, exactly when she said she would. I noticed that before I noticed anything else. No moving truck, no cardboard boxes stacked behind her SUV. No, Mom getting out first and pointing toward my front door as if she owned the right to decide who crossed it. Just Kayla behind the wheel, Mia in the passenger seat, Caleb and Lily in the back, and a silence in my driveway that felt almost ceremonial after everything that had happened there 4 months earlier. I stood behind the front window long enough to see Kayla turn off the engine and say something to the kids before anyone got out. Mia came up the walkway first. Caleb followed carrying a bakery box with both hands, and Lily held on to Kayla's fingers. None of them stepped onto the porch until I opened the door. "Hi," Kayla said. "He." It was strange how difficult such an ordinary word could feel. Mia gave me a careful smile. Caleb lifted the box. "We brought cupcakes." Kayla looked at him. Those were supposed to be a surprise. They're still a surprise if she didn't know the flavor. "What flavor?" He looked offended. "Then it won't be a surprise." I laughed, and some of the tension loosened. I stepped aside. "Come in." Mia moved first, but she stopped at the threshold for half a second before crossing it. That tiny pause hit me harder than I expected. The last time she had stood there, she had been holding a box labeled Maya Book's New Room because adults had told her that a room inside my house already belonged to her. Now she waited until I invited her in. Caleb came next. Lily slipped past me and immediately looked around like she was checking whether anything had changed. Kayla entered last. "Thanks for having us," she said. I nodded. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was a beginning. Within 10 minutes, the kids had done what children usually do when adults are carrying too much tension for the room. They ignored it. Caleb asked whether my Wi-Fi password was still the same. Lily found the basket of colored pencils under the coffee table. Mia wandered into the kitchen and inspected the cupcakes as if she had personally supervised the bakery. Kayla and I had already agreed by text that we needed to talk privately. I put on a movie for the kids in the family room, set out popcorn, and told them we would be in the kitchen if they needed anything. Kayla followed me to the island. Neither of us sat. For a few seconds, she looked at her hands. "I've been rehearsing this. That's usually dangerous." She almost smiled. "I know." Then the smile disappeared. "Mom, lead to me." I waited. About the money. About how far she'd gone with the house. About what she'd told you. About what Daniel's lawyer could do. About a lot of things. "Yes, but I knew you hadn't agreed." That was the sentence I needed. Not because I had forgotten. Because I needed to hear her say it without attaching a reason. Kayla took a breath. "I knew you hadn't said yes. I still packed everything. I still told the kids they were moving. I let Mom tell Mia she had that bedroom. I knew that if we showed up here with the children and the truck, you'd have a harder time saying no." My chest tightened. She looked directly at me. "I wanted that." "Which part?" "The pressure." She said it quietly. "I wanted you to feel like it was too late to stop us." I crossed my arms. Kayla continued before I could speak. "I wanted the house because it solved everything. No rent. The kids could stay close to school. I wouldn't have to make another decision while I was already terrified of every decision. Mom kept saying you had more space than you needed, and I let myself turn that into a reason why you should give it to me." "She built the plan," I said. "You still chose to stand inside it." "I know. You used your children to pressure me." "I know. You let Mia believe something belonged to her when it didn't." "I know." There was no argument in her voice. No tears. No, but that mattered. I had spent too much of my life watching people in our family turn apologies into negotiations. The moment the person being apologized to stayed angry, the apology became evidence that they were unreasonable. Kayla wasn't doing that. "I don't expect you to forget it," she said. "Good. I don't expect everything to go back to how it was. Also good. She gave me a tired half smile. You're making this really comfortable. You didn't come here for comfortable. No. She looked toward the family room. I came because I don't want the kids thinking you stopped loving them because of what I did. That was different. I uncrossed my arms. They won't. Can you tell them that? Yes. Even if you're still angry with me? Those things aren't connected. Kayla looked down. I know that now. I studied her for a moment. She did look different. Not dramatically. She hadn't transformed into another person in 4 months. But there was something less frantic about her. The Kayla who had arrived with the moving truck had been waiting for the next person to tell her what happened next. This version looked tired but grounded. How's the townhouse? I asked. Too beige. I've heard. Caleb says the kitchen looks like oatmeal. Accurate. Mia hates that her room is smaller. Also predictable. Lily loves the stairs, which means I hate the stairs. I smiled. Kayla pulled out her phone. I made a budget. I looked at her. Don't. I'm not saying anything. You're doing the face. What face? The one where you're shocked I learned basic adult skills. I am deeply impressed by your technological progress. You're awful. She opened the app anyway. I didn't ask to see it. That was important. She turned the screen toward me because she wanted to. The rent was high, but manageable. She had moved the remaining $16,000 out of the joint account and into an account only she controlled. Once our parents' house sold and the repayment came through, she had divided the money instead of treating it like a reset button. A portion stayed in savings. Some was reserved for legal fees and whatever adjustments the divorce might still require. She was working with a financial counselor her lawyer recommended. I had no idea how many things I didn't know, she said. That's normal. It doesn't feel normal. Most useful things don't. She rolled her eyes. What about Mom? I asked. Kayla closed the app. She hates all of this. Of course. She says I'm letting strangers run my life. Meaning your lawyer and counselor? Yes. What does she call what she was doing? Motherhood. That sounded exactly like Susan. Kayla leaned against the counter. She called me financially radicalized. I stared at her. She what? Financially radicalized. What were you doing? Opening a Roth IRA. I laughed so hard I had to put my hand on the island. Kayla started laughing too. It was the first time in months we had laughed together without the sound feeling temporary. Then her expression changed. She's still angry with you. I know. She says you chose the house over the family. I know. She says you enjoyed watching them sell. I didn't. I know. Does she? No. Are you going to tell her? I don't think explaining you to her is my job anymore. That sentence was worth more than the budgeting app. For years, Mom had made Kayla a messenger without either of them admitting it. Susan told Kayla what I really meant. Kayla told me what Mom was trying to say. Every conflict passed through her until nobody was speaking directly to anyone. Now, Kayla was letting relationships belong to the people inside them. What about Dad? I asked. She looked uncertain. He's trying. Meaning? He calls me without Mom sometimes. That's new. He apologized. I raised an eyebrow. For what? Knowing about the HELOC payment and saying nothing. Did he explain? Too much. Sounds like Dad. Kayla nodded. At first he kept saying he didn't understand how much money Mom had moved. Then I asked him the only question that mattered. What? If he'd known enough to ask me. I waited. What did he say? No. That was honest, at least. Kayla continued. Then he said he kept telling himself Mom had a plan because the plan was helping him too. I looked toward the window. That was closer to accountability than Dad had been when he called me. How do you feel about him? I don't know. That's allowed. What about you? I haven't talked to him much. You don't have to. Her answer surprised me enough that I looked at her. Old Kayla would have told me Dad was sad. She would have told me life was short. She would have asked me to call him because everyone needed to heal. This time she let my relationship with our father be mine. I probably will eventually, I said. Okay. No pressure. No deadline. No interpretation. I liked that. From the family room, Lily yelled my name. I looked at Kayla. She smiled. Go. When I walked in, the movie was paused, and all 3 children were sitting on the rug. That immediately made me suspicious. What happened? Caleb pointed at Mia. She has a question. Mia glared at him. I said maybe, which means yes. You literally can't stop talking. Lily looked at me. Are you mad at Mommy? The question cut through everything else. Kayla had followed me into the room, but stayed near the doorway. I sat on the edge of the couch. Your mom and I had some things we needed to work through. Lily frowned. That's not yes or no. I almost laughed. 5 years old and already less tolerant of evasive language than half the adults in our family. I looked at Kayla. She gave me a small nod. I was very angry with your mom. Lily considered that. Are you still? Sometimes. Caleb looked worried. I added. Being angry with someone doesn't mean you stop caring about them. Mia finally looked at me. Were you mad at us? That was the question I had known was coming. It still hurt. No. Not even that day? Never. She looked down at her hands. Grandma said you were mad because we came. I was angry about how you were brought here. Mia didn't look convinced. I leaned forward. You 3 didn't decide to hire a truck. Caleb shook his head. You didn't decide where you were moving. Another shake. You didn't make any promises about this house. Mia whispered. No. Then none of it was your fault. She looked at me. You looked really mad. I was. At Mom? At the adults. Kayla didn't move. I didn't need to protect her from the truth, but I also wasn't going to turn the children into judges. I continued. Adults can make bad decisions and still love you. But those decisions belong to the adults. Mia nodded slowly. Lily climbed onto the couch beside me. Can we still come here? Yes. Whenever? I smiled. When we plan it together. She frowned. Why? Because that's how visiting works. Caleb nodded like this was obvious. If I go to Noah's house, his mom has to say yes. Exactly. Lily looked annoyed by logic. Mia understood the deeper meaning. I could see it. Her eyes drifted toward the hallway. Then she asked, Is that still my room? The room went quiet. Kayla lowered her eyes. I knew exactly what Mia meant. The room at the end of the hall with the large window overlooking the backyard. The one Mom had promised her before anyone had asked me. I answered carefully. It was never your room. Mia's face fell slightly. I wanted to soften the truth before she had time to feel it. I stopped myself. Kindness didn't require pretending. But there's always a guest room for you when you visit. She looked at me. So I can still sleep over? When we plan it, can I use the one with the big window? Sometimes. A smile appeared. Okay. That was it. She accepted the boundary faster than Mom ever had. Caleb immediately asked whether that meant he could claim the guest room with the television. No. Why not? Because you just used the word claim. That's unfair. Life is difficult. He groaned. Lily announced that she wanted whichever room had the most stuffed animals, which somehow turned into an argument about whether stuffed animals were furniture. The tension disappeared. We ate cupcakes. Caleb lost a board game and accused all 4 of us of cheating. Lily drew a picture of my house with 5 chimneys and a purple dog on the roof. Mia helped me make grilled cheese for dinner and asked whether I thought she'd look good with shorter hair. I think that sounds like a question for your mother. Mia laughed. Grandma would already have picked it. I looked across the kitchen. Kayla had heard her. Your hair, she said. You pick. Mia smiled. No one made the moment bigger than it needed to be. That was probably why it mattered. Later, while Caleb and Lily were collecting their things, Mia stayed in the kitchen with me. Do you hate Grandma? No. She seemed surprised. I'm angry with her. That's different? Very. Mom says Grandma is mad because Mom doesn't ask her things anymore. That sounds possible. Mia thought about it. Grandma says Mom doesn't need her now. I set a plate in the dishwasher. What do you think? I think Mom still needs people. Everybody does. But not the same person for everything. I looked at her. That was more insight than I expected from 12. That's true. She shrugged. Mom's counselor says I'm not supposed to fix adult problems. Your mom's counselor is smart. Mia grinned. Mom hates when people say that. I bet. By early evening, Kayla started gathering everyone toward the door. The process took almost 15 minutes, because no child in history has ever been fully ready to leave a house the first time an adult says it is time to go. Caleb couldn't find his water bottle. Lily insisted she had brought 2 hair clips and refused to leave until both were located. Mia stood by the front door holding the leftover cupcakes. When everything was finally collected, Lily hugged me first. "I want to come back." "You can." "When?" "Ask your mom." She nodded with great seriousness. Caleb gave me a quick sideways hug and immediately pretended he hadn't. Mia stayed near the door. "I had fun." "So did I." "Can we do it again?" "Yes." She smiled. Then she reached toward the deadbolt. "Do you want me to lock it?" I looked at her hand. 4 months earlier, I had stood in that same doorway because people I loved believed access to my home could be created by need, guilt, children, paperwork, or family hierarchy. Now my niece was asking before turning a lock. "No," I said. "I've got it." She dropped her hand immediately. "Okay." Kayla looked at me. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I'll text you about next weekend. Ask first." A smile appeared. "I know." She didn't hug me. I was glad. We weren't there yet. Trying again did not require pretending the damage had disappeared. The 4 of them walked down the driveway. Lily waved from the back seat before Kayla even started the car. Caleb suddenly remembered his water bottle and ran back toward the house, grabbed it from the porch, yelled thank you, and sprinted away again. Mia stood beside the SUV waiting for him. She looked nothing like the girl I remembered holding a box marked "New Room." No box. No promise. No adult telling her that loving someone meant she was entitled to what they owned. She was simply my niece. That was enough. Kayla backed out of the driveway. I watched until her car disappeared. Then I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt myself. The sound was small. For most of my life, I had thought boundaries were walls you built to keep difficult people out. I understood them differently now. A boundary was what allowed me to invite Kayla back without wondering whether she would mistake the invitation for ownership. It let me tell Mia she was welcome without promising her a bedroom. And it let me care about my parents without making their debts, decisions, or consequences mine. Kayla and I had both learned something uncomfortable. She had spent years believing love meant letting someone else make the frightening decisions. I had spent years believing competence meant I should solve every problem I was capable of solving. Neither belief was healthy. She was learning that asking for help did not require surrendering control. I was learning that loving someone did not require rescuing them. Nothing was completely repaired. Mom was still angry. Dad and I still had conversations ahead of us. Kayla's divorce was still moving toward its final stages. But the old system was broken. Mom no longer controlled Kayla's money or spoke for her. Dad could no longer pretend silence made him neutral. Kayla could no longer blame manipulation for every choice she had made. And I no longer felt responsible for preventing consequences that belonged to someone else. My parents had sold their house. Kayla had her money back. My house was still mine. More importantly, the next time someone in my family wanted something from me, my answer would belong to me too. I looked once more toward the guest room with the big window. Mia would probably sleep there someday, when Kayla asked, and I agreed. She would be welcome, and then she would go home. That distinction didn't feel cold anymore. It felt healthy. I turned off the hallway light and went back into the kitchen. Cupcake crumbs covered the counter, colored pencils were scattered across the coffee table, and one of Lily's drawings was wedged beneath a chair. People I loved had been inside my home because I had invited them. For the first time since the moving truck appeared, the house felt quiet without feeling empty. I still loved my family. I simply stopped letting love decide ownership. And locking my own door no longer felt like shutting anyone out. It felt like knowing I could choose when to open it again. When family love starts demanding your money, home, or choices, you need clear boundaries before resentment becomes permanent. Helping someone does not mean surrendering ownership or responsibility. Let adults face the consequences of their decisions, protect children from the conflict, and choose consent over guilt. Subscribe for more powerful stories.